All right, welcome. Welcome to the fifth hearing of the Standing Committee on State Development, inquiry into the feasibility of undergrounding the transmission infrastructure for renewable energy projects. I acknowledge the Wamba Wamba, Wemba Wemba and Parepa Parapa people, the traditional custodians on the lands on which we are meeting today. I pay my respect to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people that are here joining us today. Today we'll be hearing from Ms Helen Dalton, MP, Member for Murray, Mr Terry Dodds, CEO of Murray River Council and members of the community. We will also be holding a public forum after a lunch break to provide another opportunity for people of this community to share their views on transmission infrastructure. I thank everyone for making the time and effort to be here today to give evidence to this important inquiry. Before we commence, I would like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's hearing is being broadcast live via the Parliament's website. A transcript of today's hearing will be placed on the committee's website when it becomes available. In accordance with the broadcasting guidelines, the House has authorised the filming, broadcasting and photography of committee proceedings by representatives of media organisations from any position in the room and by any member of the public from any position in the audience. Any person filming or photographing proceedings must take responsibility for the proper use of that material. This is detailed in the broadcasting resolution, a copy of which is available from our Secretariat. While parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses that are giving evidence today, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of their evidence at this hearing. I therefore urge witnesses to be careful about comments you may make to the media or to others after you complete your evidence today. Committee hearings are not intended to provide a forum for people to make adverse reflections about others under the protection of parliamentary privilege. In that regard, it is important that witnesses focus on the issues raised by the inquiry terms of reference and avoid naming individuals unnecessarily. All witnesses also have a right to procedural fairness according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. As the inquiry will be tabling its report on the 31st of August, the committee has resolved that witnesses are not required to provide answers to questions on notice. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. Finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing. I now welcome our first witness. Would you please state your name and position title and swear either an oath or affirmation?
Thank you. My name's Terry James Dodds. I'm the CEO of Murray River Council, and I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Terry, would you like to start by making an opening statement at all?
Yes, I would. Australia faces a challenge to convert from fossil fuelled power to renewables. This will require construction of a national grid to enable demand to be met and supply transported. This paradigm shift is of national significance and is supported by both higher levels of government. Renewable energy projects are continuing to emerge across the country, including near and in our region. We are faced with the reality that billions of dollars will need to be expended on thousands of kilometres of transmission lines provided to facilitate the shift. Murray River Council is situated to the north of the REZ zone in Victoria near Kerrang, to the south of the REZ zone near Hay, and southwest of the Dinwan substation connection point near Deniliquin, with the main Wagga Wagga to South Australia transmission line running roughly parallel to MRC in the north. In short, our residents are surrounded on all fronts. It will not be the case for a win-win for us, as it is inevitable that much disruption to our peace and quality of life, whether overhead or underground, will occur. It has been mooted by many that the question will be, what is the least worst solution versus what is the best? This inevitability, due to being physically surrounded, means we now need to move away from the sentiment of not in my backyard and look to how we can make it work with the least amount of impact to the broader community. But, as stated, there will not be a win-win for Murray River Council constituents. At a microeconomic level, an overhead line will be less expensive but will impact those affected forever. At a macroeconomic level, the project costs will balloon, and when energy prices are forced up due to the amortisation of a greater spend to underground the lines, Australia faces risk to our standard of living on all fronts. The feeling is that Murray River Council residents are what is known in theatres of war as collateral damage who will be sacrificed for the greater good. For the choices were, did we want our leg amputated above or below the knee? Murray River Council first met with Transgrid to hear about the route options mid-February 2023. At this meeting, Transgrid indicated the consultation report would be released with submissions invited by 5 April. The current route, named option 5A, was not part of the initial report. The project assessment conclusions report was then released on 27 May with a new option, route 5A, as announced. MRC representatives attended the regional reference workshop at the end of May. This was the first opportunity MRC had to provide feedback on cultural, environmental, land use and social constraints to be considered for the new alternative route, option 5A. Council has been included in a reference group to provide generic local knowledge to Transgrid, such as tourism hotspots and any future zoning changes. We will also provide feedback on cultural, environmental, land use and social constraints that must be considered before finalising the proposed route. We understand Transgrid initially welcomed community feedback on the draft corridor report until 4 August, which was subsequently extended until Friday the 8th of September. This is the opportunity for the community to advise Transgrid of the local factors it needs to consider in developing a transmission line. It is crucial that the community feed their thoughts or concerns directly back to Transgrid, and we strongly encourage them to do so during this feedback period. Whilst we continue to raise valid concerns and considerations, Council has very little influence over the project itself. Once Transgrid undertake route refinement and narrow the corridor down to a final alignment, the consent will rest solely with the Minister for Planning as it is classified as a state significant development / infrastructure. Despite the dire circumstances, Council will continue to advocate on behalf of our communities to achieve the least worst solution. There's a basic timeline attached to the document that was sent yesterday. It consists of 4 pages of notes and dates, starting from the 26th of the 10th, 22, where Council's Communication and Engagement Advisor from Transgrid emailed to coordinate a briefing regarding submissions to the project assessment draft report. Unfortunately, due to the floods late last year, that meeting didn't occur till February, and from then on we've been pretty well involved with some sort of meeting or other every few days since then, and there's 4 pages of notes of all the meetings that have been attended. In addition to the 4 pages of notes starting from October last year right up until the 28th of July this year, Council on its 23rd of May Ordinary Council meeting, as published in Open Council in the 23rd of May Council business paper, issued a letter based on the following to Transgrid, and Council voted unanimously on this. Murray River Council has concerns, and this is going back to option 5 because at that stage option 5A wasn't on the table. Murray River Council has concerns with option 5, namely MRC disagrees with the level of impact on high and potential agricultural land for option 5. The proposed crossing point is in a very busy and populated area of Murray River Council and home to high value irrigated cropping land. Agriculture is our region's largest economic driver, followed by tourism. The project study area of the Murray River region is home of the world's largest ski race, the Southern 80. Overhead lines would restrict access for helicopters to broadcast images of our region to more broader audiences. Overhead lines would also restrict emergency services accessing the area should an incident arise as a result of the event. The project study area of the Murray River region is popular for visitors, being the closest point to Melbourne and Greater Victoria.
Sorry,
Mr.
Chair,
Dodds,
can I interrupt the statement? I'm so sorry to do this, sir. We've got your the whole thing in front of us, and
Has the audience got the statement?
10 foot. Well, that's fine. It's just we have less time for questions.
Okay,
that's
thank
all.
you. I'll stop then. The audience would be, it would be in the audience's interest to refer to May 23 business paper.
Thank you, Mr Dodds. I'll now move to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dodds. So the papers you've tabled with us will be published, so everyone will be able to read that. We've just got some questions we need to clear. In relation to your opening statement, you said "not in my backyard" is sort of the attitude that's going to have to be adopted in this place, but in effect, these power lines and transmission lines are being forced upon these communities because people in metropolitan areas don't want power generation in their areas. They want it outside of their visible areas, so they're forcing these transmission lines on country people. Isn't it fair in that case that they bear some of the brunt, i.e. the cost of perhaps undergrounding these lines instead of forcing overhead lines on communities such as yours?
Look, I'm not qualified to say about the amortisation of the cost. But last time I was in North Sydney along the northern beaches, I didn't see any wind turbines, and I didn't see any floating photovoltaic cells in Sylvania waters either when I was there. So you have got a point that with the vast majority of people living and voting in block in Australian capital cities, to vote for something outside is much easier than something in their own backyard.
And I guess it's the case that a lot of these renewable energy projects require space. So either large areas for solar panels, or they require large clear areas in order to be able to access like the wind with wind turbines. That doesn't really work in metropolitan areas. So in effect, all these renewable energy projects are being forced upon people in rural, regional, remote communities.
Yes, that could be partly true. As I said, I'm not qualified to provide advice on the amortisation of the costs. I did work in the electricity industry for 8 years and 8 months, building electrical substations, so I know a little bit about the retail and distribution side of it, but not the generation side.
Yep. And of course, the only way really, if you're producing renewable energy power in rural, regional, remote areas, to get that power into the metropolitan areas, it doesn't get there magically. You need to transmit it, right?
I think you're 100% correct. Yes, it needs to be transmitted, and the AMO website has a fairly intricate map of the eastern seaboard of Australia showing where all those new lines are going.
Yeah. So obviously, Transgrid are consulting, and I'll use the word in inverted commas because I think there's been a lot of testimony that we've heard during this inquiry that says the consultation isn't really consultation, it's more of a dictatorial process where they sort of say what's going to happen and then try and convince you that it's the right thing. Have you found that that's the experience in your area in relation to the timeline that you were talking about?
The timeline is actually quite tight, and on the 25th of November, Council was led to believe that there was a push from both the federal and state government to deliver the VNI West sooner than the planned 2031 date, and which was noted in the AMO integrated system plan. And Transgrid is working with AMO to identify a way forward to deliver the project by 2028. So yes, the timelines have been compressed. The way that Transgrid looked at the routes was through a fairly complex matrix of scoring system, looking at social, environmental, cultural, finance, physical, and there was pages of criteria. And when Council and the public initially met Transgrid earlier in the year, there was a lot of blanks or a lot of missing information which they sought to ground truth, which was done quite well, I must admit, the ground truthing in relation to options 1 to 5 at the time. I can't comment on option 5A because that was a new option.
I've got one more question, but did you want to? I didn't want to.
I was just going to jump in about option 5A,
Sure.
actually. Your submission addresses the option 5, or the statement you were reading out from council. So can you tell the committee what the substantial changes are from the option 5A that Transgrid, I understand, it sounds like it was lobbed in at the last minute after the consultation report was released. Is that right?
Okay, so what happened, Transgrid met with council and a heap of other agencies and associations, including the federal government's representative for the RDA for our area and quite a few other people. And they assessed options 1 to 5, and consequently options 5 was written off because basically it was going through the western side of Moama, and they hadn't spoken to council until then to find out that land had all been subdivided and broken up into smaller blocks, and they were intending to put the power lines almost directly over the western end of Moama, which was a bit of a faux pas on their behalf not to have worked that out prior. So when council highlighted that fact to them, they went away and further assessed other options, which is when they came up with option 5A, which I understand wasn't until late April. As I said in my opening statement, Murray River Council is surrounded by these high voltage lines and surrounded by reses, and we feel as though we're the sacrificial lambs no matter what. And we feel as though that we weren't given much choice, since the Kerang substation, which is on the eastern side of the Victorian res, is almost directly in the centre, equidistance from Murray River Council's southern border, which is the Murray River.
Yeah.
So somewhere the lines to get to Dinwan have to cross Murray River Council's area. So we weren't given a choice.
With those 5 options that Transgrid had, as I understand it, in the initial consultation report earlier this year, I think you've got a date of February in your submission. Were any of those 5 options, did they have underground transmission as an option? Really? No. Has that come up in conversations, in anything in a formal way from Transgrid about underground transmissions?
Yes, it's come up in just about every meeting I've ever been at.
From them or
from everyone
else?
Everyone in the room.
Yep.
And the statement that council keeps hearing is it's related to expense, but equally environmental degradation, because digging up hundreds of kilometres of land to put lines in is significantly more disruptive than basically counterweights on the bottom of transmission towers.
Is that also comparative to the clearing of the hundreds or potentially thousands by the time of native vegetation as well to put those up? Or I suppose a lot of it goes over cropping here.
One of the criteria that Transgrid looked at was actually designing a line that missed the native vegetation, which is possibly why the line is so long to get from A to B from Kerang to Dinwan. If you have a look at the topographical maps along the Murray River, almost all of the Murray River has got native vegetation at either one or both sides, and there's very few gaps. So Transgrid, to get the line from Kerang to Dinwan, were basically boxed into sorting out or sorting and reviewing those gaps, which is why there was only 5 original options and then 6 options, including option 5A in the end, because there's so few crossings on the Murray River that don't go through native veg.
So just to be clear in terms of options 5 and 5A, because your submission, it addresses the 5A and what council has said into, option 5. Does Murray River Council support 5A?
Murray River Council, as I said at the beginning, is in a situation where we're asked whether we want our leg amputated above or below the knee. We don't really support anything, but we're not in denial that the line has to cross Murray River Council somewhere.
But if you support if there was another option around underground transmission in certain parts, you'd support that over what you've been offered?
As I said to Mr Fung, I'm not qualified to comment on the cost amortisation, but I would understand that the cost is in the quantum 2 or 3 times more, at least, and I'm unsure about whether or not the environmental degradation is of the same quantum. But what I do know is if it goes above ground, it'll affect the people nearby forever, and if it goes below ground, it will balloon out the costs, and it'll affect those people not wanting it in their backyard more than what it'll affect the people that have the lines through their property.
Mr Dodds, you talked about the least worst solution in your opening statement and again, in some of your remarks. What is that? Give us an idea of what that is for Murray River Council.
Well, the least worst solution is the least number of people affected, knowing that the lines somewhere, somehow, have got to go from Kerrang to Dinwar.
Yeah.
If it goes up disused railway lines, if it goes through areas through TSRs, that's another option. The exact route, I understand, hasn't been narrowed down yet. It's getting narrower as Transgrid go through.
So community feedback was happening, and I noticed there were a number of information sessions that were flagged in your evidences and your submission as well. Information.
Yeah, we've been to a lot of those.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of, there's a lot of anxiety with council because council's down if you do and down if you don't. If it goes to the east, an equal number of people will be upset as it goes to the west. But at some stage, at least by 2028, according to AMO, it'll go through Murray River.
And how have you found the consultation? Have you got any remarks? Because that's something I suppose we've heard in other hearings, that discussions around what the consultation's been or suggestions for improvement. Have you got any thoughts about how that could be improved? Or
the consultation started off in good faith. The flood sort of destroyed that, and we didn't open up the roads to Moolameen until a week before Christmas, so that basically wiped out from October until the 21st of December for council, so we're unavailable anyway. So it started off with good intentions. The flood cruelled that. There was some reasonably good consultation in the middle and then rushed consultation with the public at the end. So it's been a little bit hit and miss, not through all of Transgrid's fault. Transgrid and the government would be under pressure because of the retirement of the coal-fired power stations. If it takes until 2021 to get this up, as I said, I'm not a demand planner, but I'd assume that the reason they want to get it done 3 years early is because of the lack of generation by that stage.
Mr Dodds, just to clarify the discussion about Transgrid and the consultation, is it clear to you and the council that Transgrid actually listened and changed anything after the consultation?
Yes, it's clear to us. They certainly listened about option 5, and they weren't to know unless they had a ground truth, which they didn't do until after they met with us and went for a drive and actually had a look at all the subdivisions and all the for sale signs and the new trees planted and that sort of thing. The challenge Transgrid's and anyone and putting a high voltage transmission line anywhere is there's a million different scenarios and obstacles in the way, and it would be very difficult to get enough people in the room and to, depending on your point of view, to rate those, which they did. They had a scoring system. Depending on your point of view, you would have different weightings for different scores. Someone who was financially orientated would rate the cost of the tariff to the average tariff paper in Australia very high. Someone who's environmentally orientated will rate environmental scores very high. Someone who's socially orientated, such as council, would rate the social effect on our constituents very high. So depending on what pedestal you're standing on will depend on the score. So Transgrid are in a very difficult situation in that regards.
So is it true to say that council's view is that all of the options that are being offered at the moment will have a negative impact on the council area?
Yes, absolutely. It's going across Murray River to get from Kerrang to Dinwan, and it will have, whether it's underground or above, will have negative options, a negative effect. Below ground will have less effect locally than above ground. But the question remains to how it can be buried without having a huge environmental effect, and I can't answer that.
There's another solution though, isn't there, Mr. Dodds, really? We know that whether it is solar generation or whether it's wind generation, there is no doubt that prime agricultural land is lost when we have renewable energy projects put in regional areas such as Deniliquin, around Wagga, and the Armidale-Tamworth region, where we've all had regional hearings. And that's to generate this power that we then send to metropolitan areas. And the transmission lines themselves are obviously to move that power from those regional areas back into the metropolitan areas. It'd just be simpler, wouldn't it, to put power generation closer to the metropolitan areas, would it not? It would then remove the need to have these solar wind farms put on prime agricultural land where we produce food and fibre, and it would mean that we haven't got these crisscrossing power lines all over the state. Would that not seem like a better option?
I'm not qualified, and neither are very many people, to look at the not only the demand forecast but the capacity to generate. I've read the AMO website a few times, and each time I read it I just get more confused.
I think they do as well.
It's an extremely complex beast. I've read that our power system's our most complex machine that we run as a nation, and most other nations run as well in its level of complexity. I can't comment, but what I can comment is I hope that the people that do this professionally are looking at science versus emotion when they make those decisions about where these go. But I can't help that there's some political influence applied to that either. After being in local government since 1982, it's almost inevitable.
So if there was, say, a technological advancement that would, say, allow power generation to occur closer to metropolitan areas, removing the need to have solar and wind farms put in prime agricultural land areas, and to have these high tension power lines crisscrossing the state, creating easement issues, loss of amenity, fire risk, risk to aircraft, etc., it would seem that would be a more equitable solution for rural and regional people than having what's being enforced upon us now with these reses and transmission lines.
Look, my experience has been that equity and politics shouldn't be used in the one sentence.
Should it not, or should it not, or should it be? Should it be perhaps?
It should be, but it's never used in the one sentence.
Maybe we can change that. Thank you.
There's about a minute left. Yep. You're right. Okay. Thanks so much, Mr. Dodds, for attending this hearing today. As the inquiry will be tabling its report on the 31st of August, the committee has resolved that you are not required to provide any answers to questions on notice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Okay. So I'd now like to welcome our next witness, Mrs. Helen Dalton, MP. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mrs. Dalton, I remind you that you do not need to be sworn. as you have already sworn an oath to your office as a Member of Parliament. Would you like to start by making a short opening statement today?
Yeah, no, thank you. And good morning, and thank you for your time today. I know it's been an impromptu hearing, but all the same, we appreciate the efforts that have gone into it, and so the community does as well. So I'll go straight to the point. A few weeks ago, Premier Minns was questioned on Sydney radio about power lines and why they can't be undergrounded. He said it would be too expensive. To me, the decision has already been made with those words. So with all due respect to the work of the committee, and I welcome again, you're here today, I wonder what this committee's deliberations are meant to achieve. So I'm really hoping that there will be change, especially when the Premier has already seemingly ruled out undergrounding of power lines as it's far too expensive, so he says. And when the Premier says it's too expensive to underground power lines, on what estimate is he relying on? Transgrid certainly has a financial interest in having them above ground, and of course they will pocket that money. So what about the real costs of the projects anyway? We are well used to this by now. The benefits of these projects are overestimated and the costs are underestimated. We've heard it all before, and we're told it'll mean cheaper power prices. Well, a report by Professors Bruce Mountain and Simon Bartlett from the Victorian Energy Policy Centre says otherwise. We already know that the other costs of putting these lines over the ground. Professors Martin and Bartlett have made these clear, and there are many others who have raised objections, including the people that are here today. I think there's 16 submissions and done in a very short amount of time. A natural disaster magnet is what Professors Mountain and Bartlett have called it. That's because over the ground power lines are known to cause bushfires, and we have experienced that over the years here. New South Wales farmers say the short-term cost savings of overhead power lines are cancelled out because of the bushfire risks and restrictions on fighting fires in areas with power lines, the loss of critical vegetation and visual amenity, the higher the maintenance costs and outage risks, as well as there will be interference with farm equipment reliant on GPS and interference with agriculture aviation. And I know from personal experience what that means. We had a workman who was a helicopter pilot. He worked part-time for us on our farm and part-time with Riverina Helicopters. He hit power lines at Conago, which is just half an hour out from here, from Deniliquin, and was rushed to Melbourne, where he later died on his own during COVID. And his his mother was in Condobolin, and couldn't get to him. So we've already been through those. So these lines will create a far bigger risk. Farmers are also pointing to undergrounding projects in other developed countries and rightly want to know why it can't be done here. So I would suggest that Transgrid are not keeping up with the times. I trust the committee is fully looking into that. I think it's old technology. So we know farmers are against it, and we expect to hear some more evidence here today. It seems to me around here that we are expendable cannon fodder for green city ideology. We provide the food, we provide valuable exports to city people. We are out here, we're almost out of sight, out of mind. Taken for granted, we receive lower standard of health services, lower standard of education provision, and our land can be just ripped up to provide power to the cities. The problems being caused by these power line projects do not seem to be registering with a lot of city people. We saw the big protest yesterday in Melbourne, and I think it's just the start. And that is what is needed to get the message across. Big companies with their billions forcing their way onto people's lands that in many cases have been farmed over generations is very controversial. And it certainly is here. And in my electorate, compulsory land acquisition for this project is in the context of Tanya Plibersek's threat to implement compulsory water buybacks. So it's compulsory water buybacks, and we see compulsory land acquisition for this project. We have got reform, and inverted commas, I use that word very loosely, fatigue. And I don't think that its Transgrid VNI West project would ever go ahead through a city. And that's because we're out here in the rural area. The cheap way is to put it over the ground and let the rural people pay the full cost of that. We've already do our bit for the environment here, and these overground power lines are just a bridge too far. I've discussed the views of farmers, and let's also acknowledge many green groups are also against these overground power line projects. The National Parks Association says that undergrounding power lines is international best practice. It dismisses Transgrid's claims that undergrounding power lines will harm the land because of the heat. The Nature Conservation Council of New South Wales supports undergrounding. It says there is a need to balance the renewable energy transition with its impact on the environment. The construction of above-ground transmission could damage ecosystems and remove thousands of hectares of habitat. It will damage ecosystems. The solution, the Nature Conservation Council says, is to put the lines underground, and I quote them, "We acknowledge that there is a higher cost associated with international best practice underground connections. However, in a climate and biodiversity crisis, and when the vast majority of the public want more done to protect nature, financial costs can no longer be the only determining factor." Before I conclude, let me return to the issue of compulsory land acquisitions. The National Farmers Federation has vowed to oppose any widespread compulsory acquisition of land to the bitter end, and I agree with them, as do many other people around here. There is a lot of concern around compulsory acquisitions, let me tell you. In closing, I agree with Professors Mountain and Bartlett, who question the need for VNI West project at all. Other alternatives need to be looked at because the cost of this to my community is too great. If this project is to occur, despite widespread opposition in my electorate, it needs to be put underground. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to questions starting off with Dr.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for appearing today, Mrs. Dalton. And I just wanted to start in relation to VNI West, and I guess the proposal to bring forward the construction date from, early 2030 to a completion date that's closer to the end of, around 2028, thereabouts. Have you been consulted at all in relation to that acceleration of the project by Transgrid or by the state government?
Certainly not the state government. I couldn't attend the last meeting with Transgrid. One of my staffers did that. Not really consulted, no. Consultation is not, they're just giving me updates. So I don't think that I would have been consulted, or my staff hasn't mentioned that to bring it forward.
Because we know that things like Snowy 2.0 have obviously been delayed because they're still trying to dig a boring hole out of a cave, and there's, I guess, a number of renewable energy projects that are reliant on these lines that have also been delayed. So it's curious that they want to, I guess, accelerate this project to completion. What advocacy do you think you're able to provide to see the community at least have a little bit of a reprieve to go back to what was the original timeline for the project?
I'll certainly be bringing it up in Parliament. I think the more information, and I'm receiving a lot of information from right up through to people in the Snowy Mountains. It seems like Snowy 2.0 is a complete white elephant. Florence, the tunnelling machine, Florence is the machine that is bogged. It's costing it will cost us billions ahead of what they have projected. And I think a lot of these projects, and we've seen that time and time again, where, for example, Julia Gillard shoehorned another 450 gigalitres of water in the dying days of her Prime Ministership. And then again, you see Malcolm Turnbull doing the same thing with Snowy 2.0 at the end of his Prime Ministership, leaving what he thinks is a legacy a great legacy without doing due diligence with this project. It'll impact on irrigators, it'll cost us a fortune, and there are better ways of generating power. And they're expecting us to reform, so-called reform or adjust to the closing down of coal fire and having renewables in a very, very short time.
We've only got about 12 minutes of questions each, so I just wanted to fire a few more questions in. Have you had a chance to meet with the Environment Minister and Energy Minister in relation to this project?
I have spoken to Tanya Moriarty with the Ag Minister about this. I haven't as yet spoken to Penny Sharp, but I certainly wish to.
And what did Ms Moriarty say to you in relation to the loss of prime agricultural land and the impact of easements, etc., of the overheads?
Not a lot, but she did roll her eyes as if to say, oh my God, this is a big issue. She's getting hold, I suppose, easing her way into the ag portfolio. She hasn't got an agricultural background. She's learning, and she just said that she was going to discuss the matter with the Federal Energy Minister, and by the expression on her face, she knows it is a massive issue.
So, given that I guess you've had conversations with Ms Moriarty at a state level, have you had any engagement with the federal government, knowing that, in effect, this interconnection of energy markets is more of a federal issue when we're talking about cross-border supplying of power than it is perhaps a state issue? Have you had the opportunity to speak with federal members, Chris Bowen, Murray Watt, about the impacts of on your community in relation to these transmission lines?
Not as yet. With the change of the route just recently, I haven't had the opportunity to discuss that, but I've certainly been talking to state members, but not as yet, but I intend to.
So if it's the case that you have the Energy and Environment Minister at a state level effectively saying, as the Premier did, as you rightly indicated on radio, that these lines are going to go ahead no matter what, the outcome of this inquiry won't matter, won't change a thing, what are you going to do as a local member to have the views of your community represented? How are you able to force the current Labor government to have their views acknowledged in relation to these power lines?
Look, I'm a firm believer of people power. I do say to my community that I can't do it by myself. We've seen protests in Melbourne just yesterday. People won't rest. They're not going to be rolled over. I will be making a lot of statements in Parliament with private member statements, notices of motion, and I've started doing that. I don't rest. I continue on and make sure that we are heard in Sydney. And I'll do the same. I'll be speaking to Deborah O'Neill and a few others that are in the upper house federally. Murray Watt, I will be making that very, very plain. So I'm only just beginning to launch into all of that. We have had massive issues with water as well, and it almost intersects with the power and energy portfolio as well.
When you've got a Premier effectively dismissing the outcome of a parliamentary inquiry before we've even finished the hearings, don't you think that a speech in Parliament's perhaps unlikely to shift his position? Are you considering some more some stronger positioning in relation to the views of the current Labor state government so that your community is heard?
It's the media that makes the change. It's pressure on our leaders that make the change. We've just seen today a bad decision by the Coalition 5 years ago with the merging of the only two public high schools in Griffith that are now to be demerged. And that's power, that's media pressure, that's pressure from the community. I intend to do the same with these overground power lines, and it can be done.
So what happens then if we see a situation where, in effect, if this committee finds that undergrounding is feasible and the additional cost is justified, and that the position that we take forward to the Parliament through this committee is ignored by the current Labor government, what options do you see then? Like, are you able to perhaps use your number on the floor to provide some impetus to the Labor government to encourage them to have the views of your community better heard?
It's a minority Labor government, and I think as an independent and part of the crossbench, we have enormous influence, so I won't rest. And I think that in the end, common sense will prevail. These blowouts, with the Snow 2.0, is just going to be next level. It's going to be a huge problem. We did see at the Bush Summit Peter Dutton talking about he thinks that every community should have a nuclear reactor, so there would not be the need for these power lines. So that's another issue, another solution that could be followed up, and I'm hoping that this committee will make recommendations for such things.
So I'm a supporter of nuclear power, and I've always been a supporter, especially for small modular reactors. Do you feel the same way? Do you think that perhaps nuclear power is an opportunity to provide power generation closer to the populace, removing the need to use prime agricultural land to generate power and to transmit it?
We should be exploring every option. We sell uranium to other countries for their nuclear energy. I'm not understanding why we don't utilise that ourselves.
Yeah. You spoke, and I know my time's almost up.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. I note you spoke about the fact that it is a minority Labor government, especially in the lower house, and that obviously there's they require certain members to be able to get legislation through at any particular point. Given that, and I guess the view that there's an importance for independence, I know that Joe McGirr has been able to speak with the Environment Minister and the Energy Minister about these transmission projects that are going through the Snowy Valleys and Wagga, and we heard from Wagga Council around the land that's been compulsorily acquired in their Grigadoo Waste Management Centre for transgrid projects. Is it not the case that you should be in a position to be able to have forced already a meeting with the Energy and Environment Minister, who is in effect, I guess, responsible for the oversight of a lot of these issues, by now, given that the election was in March, and we're sort of now in middle of August? Shouldn't these views already have been put to her and sort of some commitment secured by you?
For sure, just been absolutely flat out. I'll be speaking to Joe McGirr next week about what we can, when we've spoken on and off about the situation. People haven't, I suppose, spoken out about undergrounding them until just recently here. I think we were very uncertain of the route which was going to be taken. But now, we're even speaking to Joe in the last sitting week, we intend to get together and make some presentations, and if that means going together, going to see the Environment Minister, Penny Sharp, and the Federal Environment Minister, we will do just that. So, I think given that this electorate is the second biggest electorate, 110,000 square kilometres, and provide a huge amount of food for New South Wales, indeed the nation, we matter. So I would hope that the views of Murray and of course the views of Wagga would be taken in, and be taken into account and respected.
Thank you. We'll now move to Kate for questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for appearing today. Could you just expand a bit more for the committee about the impact that overhead transmission lines will have on the region in terms of cropping in particular? There's been a number of submissions that have been made around that. I'm thinking along the lines of how much land will need to be sacrificed, if you like, to the transmission lines and the impact that will have, as well as expanding on the cropping aerial activity that takes place in this region and how significant that will be.
The transmission lines above ground are going to take a fair bit of our land, and of course, I think it's like 100 metres. I'm not sure exactly of what it is, either side of those lines.
That's about right.
So that cost is now borne on the farmers with lost productivity. Sure, you can graze under those power lines, but you wouldn't want to be cropping. It also changes the way we have to do business, because often we use planes and helicopters in irrigation areas particularly, and we have to dodge those power lines. So we've got to now change the way we farm. We probably, it's going to be more expensive and probably less efficient the way we do it. And often the timing of things, we have to get planes in quickly, especially like with cotton, and there's cotton grown in this area. You have to make decisions quickly. If you need a plane to go over the top of that cotton, it needs to be done today. That changes now with people using ground rigs. It will be slower. So we're bearing, the costs are borne by the farmer, not only just with the loss of land and productivity, but the extra costs in changing the way we do business. And of course, we're looking for efficiencies every day so that we can get food and fibre to the people as cheap as possible.
Has this concerns also been raised in relation to bushfire risks? So we've heard from landholders in both Armidale and Tumut that there are concerns in relation to being able to fight fires if their fires are on their property as a result of the transmission lines not being able to pass under them, having to stay a distance away, potential for transmission lines to cause fires in some circumstances. Has that also been raised with you locally?
Absolutely, and the insurance, like who pays if Transgrid or those lines start a fire, and then what if I start a fire accidentally, you know, or there's what insurance, what protections do I have? There's also the issue of capital gains tax. This land that's been acquired, will I be taxed because I receive a sum of money? Will I be taxed on or get capital gains tax on the sale of that land? And we have submitted that question to the Parliamentary Library, and they do not know as yet. So those questions need to be answered fully.
Can I just check on that? Are you saying if the landholder receives some form of compensation or payment?
Yeah. And the other thing too is, it's all very, it's not transparent, any of this process. So I have done a great deal with Transgrid, and your deal may not be as good as mine. Is it because, I'm better educated and may be able to negotiate better? Does that mean that I deserve more money than you? All these things need to be taken into account. And of course, the loss of productivity in our regions is not just borne by the farmer too, it's borne by the whole community. And that needs to be stated loud and clear.
Can I check in terms of the Transgrid's, the consultation and their approach so far in relation to this proposed project? What the community sentiment is around the way in which they've conducted themselves, the way in which they've been available for consultation. What's the general community sentiment that you're picking up?
Well, they're appalled by the lack of consultation. I mean, I don't know whether they think that people live 5 minutes from town and will just give you, half a day or not even notice really that they're running these sessions. People are an hour or so from here. They've got to make plans too. They've got kids' buses to run after. All those things need to be considered. It's almost like we're so over it because we've gone through all of this, the same situation with the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, where the consultation hasn't been genuine. We've been shafted on many occasions. They try and heavily script the meetings. They conquer and divide us up. It's almost like they have this manual on how to get something through without genuinely consulting. We'd appreciate, the consultations being made public, time to get there and plan, all those things, basically to be respectful of country people.
Is there a difference from the conversations you've had? Is there more willingness from most landholders, some landholders, to accommodate underground transmission lines, or is it a general resistance to all of it?
I don't think there's a general resistance. I think in probably the more marginal areas, it's not worrying them too much, where you've got a property that doesn't crop. They're just running stock out towards the western part of the electorate. It's not on high value land. There's not those concerns. Fire is always a concern for sure, but not with aerial applicators and I guess the loss of productivity, not as much because they're not cropping. But where you've got mixed farming, it's difficult, and high value land. Of course, there are concerns about solar farms and the disposal of those solar panels when they become obsolete, and they will be obsolete in a very short time. There's no doubt about that. Who bears the cost of that? And I was hoping that Councillor Dodds might bring that up, that I would hope that the government looks into that and has, like any mining, that you rehabilitate after you leave, perhaps take a bond from these foreign companies that are coming in, and they are foreign too, coming in, that they are obliged to provide a bond before they leave, so that we can dispose of those panels without, and that's the same with the wind farm too, very expensive, dispose of those, that equipment when they're obsolete, and they will be.
So we've heard from landholders in relation to HumeLink, who were very clear that they reject overhead transmissions, they reject the current proposal, that they will essentially not allow Transgrid onto their property, that they are going to put up a massive fight. It's going to be ugly, basically, from their mouths, so to speak. But if it was underground, they would allow it to proceed pretty much tomorrow. Maybe it's too soon for this area because of the timing of the consultation is slightly different. Lots of landholders are kind of almost just finding out about it.
Yep.
Is there a similar sentiment here, do you think?
I think so, particularly around this area. I had, once the route, the new route was put through, I had phone call after phone call, email after email. We're used to rallying. We don't want to do it. We don't want to protest, but we're not going to stand aside and just be run over either. It's just too important an issue. So it will be ugly, I think. And we saw protests at the Bush Summit in Tamworth. They were there ready to send a clear message to the governments, loud and clear, that we matter, and we do.
So organisations like Transgrid, who do have to build the infrastructure, they don't have to build overhead transmission lines. They could obviously go underground. they like to talk about the importance of social licence. Does Transgrid have a social licence in this community to build overhead transmission lines?
Well, when I first started speaking to them, I just said that I wanted every community in my electorate to be really happy that you're here. So you need to, provide something if that's what the community wants. And they said that they would sponsor the football team, and I just went, no, it's not trinkets and beads. So, we want enduring legacy from Transgrid if they are to be here, but I think the whole project has not been well thought out by governments at all, and I think the technology is obsolete, and we should really start from the beginning again and take a good, hard, long look at this.
Is it your view that the way in which this Transgrid, we just heard from the previous witness from Murray River Council, that there was no option in the 5 options provided for underground transmission. Is it your view that Transgrid seems to be ideologically bound? It seems to be ideology as opposed to the facts, that the evidence put forward in favour of overhead transmission line just appears to be almost ideological in some ways. I'm struggling with this question, but I've been trying to work out why Transgrid has so stubbornly put forward overhead transmission lines as the only option, seems to have rejected every very sensible argument for underground transmission lines. What's your view around that? It just does seem to be extremely frustrating that the community is not getting objective facts about the underground versus overhead transmission line argument, and there's no balance. What are you seeing in that regard?
I think they're a big company driven by profits, and I think that they probably will see how much they can get away with before they have to probably cut their profit margin and embark on best practice. And best practice is not having overhead power lines. We know that in Germany, they're under the ground, and that's what they should be doing.
My time's up.
Thanks. Thanks, Helen, and thanks for appearing today. I suppose before I start with questions, I just wanted to acknowledge your opening statement and the loss of life that you mentioned in the tragic event with the helicopter pilot. So thank you for sharing that with us. And our thoughts with our family. Yeah.
And I do appreciate all the hard work the committee has been doing, and to get you here, it's quite a project to get you all here. So thank you. And I almost think that all these electrical wires remind me of Transgrid. Really? Anyway.
So, in terms of...
hang on.
you're still...
Oh, sorry, I've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
You're not getting away that easy.
Well, if I didn't use up the time, I'm sure somebody else would find use for it.
Oh, man, I'm very happy to continue
With your question. No, I've got questions. Thank you. Sorry, Helen. In terms of the, you mentioned in your opening remarks also about the Premier and talking about undergrounding being an expensive option or too expensive an option. We've heard other evidence in this inquiry, in some of the Sydney hearings as well, about the delays that undergrounding would also acknowledge it is a much more expensive option, but also the delays that it would the projects would incur. Were it to be undergrounded. Have you any comments on that or thoughts about that?
Look, I think, as I said before, reform or change takes a long time, and we're expected to adapt quickly in really unrealistic timeframes. And I think because these timeframes are unrealistic, that they're cutting corners, they're not looking at all the options, and they should be. Our kids will be wearing, this disaster, and I think it is, for generations. It's money too, public money. It needs to be done right. and here's the opportunity. So to maybe slow down, I'd almost say that instead of switching off some of these coal-fired power burners, that we build a couple in the interim to make sure that we get it right, and we can switch them off later. You know, if we get the solutions to this power generation right, rather than just rushing things in for the sake of it.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of, you know, the consequences of rushing things or, you know, having things balloon out in cost, is it fair to say the cost of electricity is an issue that is felt in your electorate?
Absolutely. So we have processing of the agricultural product. You know, the way things are going with the cost of electricity, it's pricing us out of business. We're seeing businesses going broke. I think, you know, really we need to look after ourselves. It can't be at the cost of communities, the cost of family businesses, and often generational businesses. It needs to be well planned and well researched, and not just some, you know, whim. Somebody decided, you know, a few years ago that this would be a good idea. So everything needs to be put out on the table, and we're a very forward-thinking nation, and yet we're making silly decisions like this.
In terms of I suppose the comments also around the nuclear technology, and I know Wes's thoughts on this, there are also consequences, it would be fair to say, with technology like that, such as the disposal of nuclear waste.
You should have done
and
a nuclear
that's
inquiry.
typically in regional areas. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Look, I would. I really don't know all the ins and outs of all of that, but again, it should be looked into, and I think it could be something that is not you know, a negative if we did it right, and we, you know, disposed of that in a very stable environment and looked after it. It can be done.
Susan had questions if there's a little bit.
In terms of sure. In terms of the VNI connector, and I apologise, we've been talking a lot about HumeLink in this inquiry thus far, so I'm only just getting up to speed on VNI myself. But it's fair to say that so that project isn't quite as advanced in the consultation period, is that? Yeah. And have you got any further comments on or suggestions around that consultation, or?
Only that it be genuine and give people time and advertise in papers. There's a lot of people that aren't connected digitally because of poor connections, and our papers are far more important in the bush than what they probably are in the city, because people are online more in the city. I think that the notices for meetings should be done, you know, with at least a week in advance, and they should be put in the papers, consecutive papers, so that people understand, because it's their go-to. There's no doubt about that. And I know the Denny Pastoral Times has 2 editions during the week. Everyone buys the paper, and it's a very successful paper, and people love the Deniliquin Pastoral Times, and it would only be, I think, respectful for notices to go in to that. Notices, of course, can go up online on different sites as well, but for the ageing generations and whatever, the Denny Pastoral Times is incredibly important, and I would suggest in every rural area that they do that.
Yeah, I know, obviously, coming from a regional area myself, it is the go-to for many people. Time to move to you, Susan.
Thank you. Mrs. Dalton, we've heard a lot about the significant burden on your community and your electorate that this project will bring. Are there any benefits that your community will receive as a result of these projects?
Well, I have heard councils are thinking about reaching out to Transgrid to get money coming in to provide certain services that the government is not prepared to do. So I guess there's a benefit in that. There's no doubt about that. There's an injection of money. We're finding that the workers that are coming through, this is how limited their knowledge is. They just think they can snap their fingers and they'll have workers, and that they'll have housing to put those workers in. They've got some lot of challenges to do and to make, and they're not the only things that are occurring in areas. There's masses of solar farms are being set up right now, wind farms, and also nut farms. A lot of development, but of course it's only a sugar hit in these communities. They're here and then they're gone.
So you're concerned that any benefits that your local community would receive would be just during the building stage,
100%.
and then there's long-term burden but no long-term benefit?
That's right.
We've heard talk about power prices, which are certainly a huge issue. Do you have any confidence that this project will reduce power prices for your community?
Oh, there's a lot of talk, but I think there's a lot of scepticism too about all of that. I think the scepticism is like South Australia's secured their water, now they're going to secure their power. I think that, whether that's being cynical, but that would seem to me to be a lot of the driving force, that a couple of marginal seats in South Australia may have a fair, something to do with all of this and the timing of it.
So if I understand you, you're concerned that some of these projects are designed, they're projects in New South Wales, but not to benefit the people of New South Wales.
That's my gut feeling. So I haven't got anything, stats or whatever, but that's my gut feeling, and I think that's the feeling of the community as well.
And when you spoke to Minister Moriarty in relation to the potential degradation of good agricultural land by the construction of the power lines, what answers did the Minister for Agriculture have for you about this agricultural degradation?
She didn't have any answers, only that she was going to meet, I think, shortly in that meeting with her federal counterpart. So I haven't followed up with her about what happened or the results of that meeting.
And I note your statement that you felt that Transgrid were updating you rather than consulting with you. Are you able to actually talk to Transgrid to develop the best possible option for your community?
Well, we'll schedule in I think they're scheduling in another meeting shortly. So yeah, as things are sort of panning out, we get information from our constituents. We are relaying their concerns to them. In fact, I ran into the Transgrid representative at the Bush Summit, and I told her about some of the concerns that we had, and that was only last Thursday. So I'm hoping that she'll take that back to...
Did she give you a commitment on what? Sorry.
No, you go.
Did she give you a commitment on what it was that she would do in relation to VNI West?
She just said she'd take my concerns on board. So I presume...
Did she tell you who she'd be giving them to?
No.
Did you push her for a position or a concrete answer as to a change in policy, a change in route, a change in the way that consultations... did you get anything concrete out of...
No, not really,
her at all?
other than she took it on board, and I know that I've got a meeting that's scheduled again in the next few weeks with Transgrid, so I would expect to be following up on that. But it was only a fleeting conversation as we were moving into the auditorium in Tamworth.
Thanks, Helen, Mrs. Dalton. That concludes the time for questioning for today for you. Thank you for attending the hearing. As the inquiry will be tabling its report on the 31st of August, as previously mentioned, the committee has resolved that you are not required to provide answers to any questions taken on notice, not that you took any. Thank you. I think we are now hearing from community members. So in terms of a suggestion for how we run this next session, we've got 8 listed community members. If we could appear in lots of 4, and so we'll bring the first 4 names up initially for the first half hour and then swap over and get the second lot of 4 names. So Ms Anne Hare, Neil Bull, Peter Redfern and Bob Crawford, if you could come forward, and then we'll hear from the next lot.
God-fearing man. A God-fearing man.
What's the difference thing? Oh, solemnly.
Okay, I now welcome all our next witnesses. Could each witness, starting on my left, please state their name and any relevant position title and swear either an oath or affirmation. Starting with you, Ms Hare.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right.
Sorry, Anne Hare. I farm at Moolamee, New South Wales. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare the affirmation that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be truth, and the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. I'm Neil Bull. I'm the Policy and Project Manager for the Rice Growers Association of Australia. The association represents around 1,000 rice growers across the Riverina and many across the proposed power line construction. I'm also a member of the regional group that Transgrid has set up since day one in terms of consultation.
And could you swear either an oath
Yes.
or an affirmation?
I solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Okay, my name's Bob Crawford. I farm out near Moolameen, but I've been on local government, the electricity supply distribution network many years ago, mind you. And I'd like to thank you for coming down to Deniliquin before I make my oath. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Yeah, I'm Peter Redfern. I'm a farmer from Moolameen, probably regarded as a conservationist as well. I also represent the Walkerhill Landholders Association here today. I'm an executive member of that. And so I solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Would any of you like to start by making a short opening statement as well?
I'm happy to start if that's...
Yeah.
Okay. As I mentioned, I represent rice growers. I guess in a brief introduction, I've been aware of the potential construction of interconnectors since late last year and agreed to participate in a regional group more to try and communicate that across our communities. Now, this route has changed multiple times since my first meeting since last October, so I know that's separate to this, but our communities in this area have only learnt about this power line with any great knowledge less than 4 weeks ago. And to me, that process has been totally flawed. And to take that forward, to then have an understanding of what undergrounding these power lines really means in this context is very difficult for the average community member or rice grower that we represent, but even been a challenge for me who actually works in the area of policy. So I'd just like to make that point before I might make some comments about undergrounding, which is what this particular inquiry is
Sir,
about.
before you do, could I please ask that you put and maybe if all the speakers can, it's just a bit difficult to hear, can you pull the microphone, which is this heavier one, closer to you? The other one is for Hansard. Yes, if you could all do that, please, because everyone's speaking quite softly, that would be great for me and for the public, I think. So the other one. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Look, I'll be quick. I assume
We do
you've
have
read.
your submissions as well, so if you can avoid covering anything, because we have read the submissions provided, so yeah, any additional comments, I suppose, yeah.
Yep. So basically, in that submission, I've referred to the cost to start with.
Yep.
It is very difficult in this short time frame for me to research the actual costs, but there's no talk of innovation in the reduction of costs for undergrounding anywhere. This thing, new satellites flying just above our head, connecting the world to communications. Farmers that adopt innovation continually to reduce costs when they are forced to reduce costs to maintain in business. It seems to me when we talk about cost of undergrounding compared to overhead, where is the new technology in this when we look at the increased cost for it? Because the benefits of doing it are significant and high. In relation to rice production, we don't know where this will go, but I'm aware it's proposed to grow across many rice farms. Now, rice farms use aerial agriculture, number one. You know, a tower of 70 metres or plus has then a barrier of 60 metres either side of any of that for aerial operation. And assuming that's a straight line, or maybe that there's a way to find a track through a rice farm to build it. Maybe not. But no plane's going to wait 60 metres before climbing and going over a power line. So the impact on rice production or reduction in rice plantings is significant. This town in Deniliquin, its employment is largely that rice mill you'll see if you drive past it. So there's a massive land use issue at stake here when we're going up with overhead power lines, particularly in terms of high value irrigated agriculture. Can't be forgotten. Innovative irrigated agriculture involves drone technology, imagery to monitor crop progress, any health issues, disease issues, plus the application of aerial-based seeding to fertiliser to chemical treatments to protect the crop. So immediately power lines are put in a convenient location underground. That removes that risk as well. And again, with aerial operation, with undergrounding, we have bushfires in this country, some of which may be caused by these power lines that I understand operate at something like 500 degrees Celsius anyway. Throw them out when it could be 60 degrees in the sun, adding a bit for climate change. I suspect the risk from them starting a fire is great. But while we've got them overground, how will our aerial aircraft and other things deal with those landscapes and dodging these overhead power lines? So to me, a fire risk is really, really important. But we can't afford, there's no new rice ground, I'll point out as well. There's no way to replace that. All of our rice ground is developed because it's specific to soil type, and of course, irrigation infrastructure that rice is grown on, it costs a lot of money, thousands and thousands of dollars a hectare of land value, plus the infrastructure costs, how we move water across the landscapes, all of things, you know, massive costs to interrupt that. Again, undergrounding and using easements instead of going cross-farm where possible can really change that. Undergrounding also allows a lesser easement to be involved. And, you know, I'm amused with Transgrid. Somehow, you know, in June, the preferred option was option 5, and then forced to create a 5A. 5A has now become option 1. So I'm a bit of a cynic about how all that's unfolded as well. And there's an absolute lack of trust out there in the community about what any of this means. And it's been thrown across the community within months of them being under forced to work with one of the greatest floods ever experienced in this region, underwater for months. Totally disrespectful to the community.
Was there any other opening statements, Mr. Crawford?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I want to address the specific terms of reference of your group, the number A, were benefit cost. And my knowledge about addressing that comes from 8 years in local government, and then I actually had 8 years in the County Council electricity, which was the Murray River one. And it distributed power from east of Albury all the way to Broken Hill. And, you know, so that experience was invaluable. And I've experienced the outcome of a fire in the transmission lines. Like it started in Albury, we lost all the transformers in minutes. And so that experience really led me to think more about how we, connect the high voltage lines, and that was invaluable to this inquiry as far as I can see. The other thing that I experienced when I was a council member and chair of this, or president of this county council, was we had an interconnector. And many of you probably wouldn't know that, but out at Mildura, we would take electricity from Victorian network, and then we transported it up to, or we transmitted it up to Broken Hill, and actually, so it was Victorian power being supplied at Broken Hill. And so that experience was really quite neat. And it could be of benefit when I discuss this next little point. There was an issue. The Victorians reckon we were having more power than we were actually distributing and metering out at Broken Hill. And so there was all this argy-bargy going on saying, no, you've taken so many megawatts, or terawatts, or whatever it was at that time, and we'd say, no, this is what we've metered out and distributed. And therefore, there was always this argy-barginess going on. And it was an alternating current interconnector. And the big thing about a direct current one is that you can measure it, you can order it, you can measure it, and there's no argument. And that's what I really want to finish by saying in this short start, that I have no doubt that all new interconnections and new renewable energy zones, I'm talking about a zone rather than the individual ones in that zone, and they should be connected to the transmission lines through a high voltage direct current connection. And that really forces it so that you know exactly what's coming out, you can measure it, there's no argument, it's there. And so that's the point that I wish to make today.
Thank you. Are there any other opening statements?
Well, I'm a rice farmer at Moolameen, so obviously, and my properties, I've got 5 properties, and they're all within the 10K shaded zone that was sprung upon us. I found out about it on the 10th of July, and I was in Birdsville. That's the first I knew about it. And then when I got home, there was some mail that we'd received on about the 17th or 16th of July. So it's hardly great notice. We were expected to make a contribution to the story by the 4th of August. That's since been extended, but still totally inadequate, really, for the amount of work that's involved, and we are fully employed beforehand. And the other thing I gleaned from Mr. Dodd's presentation that I really think the Murray River Council has thrown us under a bus. Option 5 was rejected, now we're looking for another option, and we were the ones that were thrown under the bus there. And I also make it known that Transgrid sponsored the Moama lights. So there's a conflict of interest there too, I believe. I've been involved in conservation work on my property for many years, and there's 4 endangered birds recorded on my place, including the ones that I've been releasing in a captive breeding program. So we've released about 70 bushstone curlews which are endangered in New South Wales. There's painted snipe, the Australasian bittern and the ground cuckoo shrike are regularly recorded on my properties. Now, the problem we've had with the bushstone curlew is colliding with the single wire earth return power lines, which are single, quite a small scale thing compared to what we're looking forward to. So from my point of view, for the wildlife, it'll be a damn disaster, apart from all the restrictions on our farming operation. So my opinion is, I'm not convinced that this line is necessary, number one. Number 2, if it was necessary, and my property was in a direct line between the start and the finish, I would almost have to accept it. But that's not what's happening here. We're talking about close to 140 k's extra on the original 5-option proposal, which amounts to, on today's cost, to be $600 or $700 million. And you know, by the time that it's built, it'll be several billion, you know, going by past history of these things. So I'd be looking at small-scale renewables, talking about encouraging reduced consumption, maybe switch off the lights in the cities at night. Are they scared of the dark? Solving energy problems without having impacts on wildlife and habitat, and efficiency costs and socio-economic impacts be major considerations. So that's about where I come from.
Thanks.
And thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. There are no wanting to make an opening statement. Go
First,
for it. Yep.
thank you everyone for coming out here. It's good to be able to speak to people and at least feel that we have a voice. Our area is pretty cranky. I'm personally pretty cranky. We've had so much reform. We're just sick to death of it. Council reform, water reform. You know, the city doesn't like it, so we'll throw it out and we'll neck rural areas with it because there's no population there and no one lives there, so it's going to be the path of less resistance, which was something that was said to us by Transgrid. We're out here because there's no population and we thought it'd be the path of less resistance. And Transgrid also told me at one of those meetings that it's AEMO that decides whether the lines go overhead or underground. Perhaps it's just another one of their lies, which there have been a few. They also told me that the first time they met with council was the 22nd of May 2022, which is a question they had to take on notice and take 24 hours to get back to me on. And I suppose as far as the lines coming through our area and the solar installations and the everything wind and solar, I find it extraordinary being a farmer that Australia's going to peg its electricity security on intermittent, unreliable wind, weather, sunshine, because we're out here and that's an integral part of our business. We've got to try and work out what's happening, when it's going to happen, when we've got to do things, when we've got to put a plane over. So I've got a little bit of a spiel here that I wrote. Transmission lines should only be put if they are going to generate and be useful for the needs for 100 years. The future of solar and wind farms, as I just said, is uncontrollable. Like in the morning, a solar wind farm never knows what's going to generate, if anything. They're not a finite thing. Whereas coal and nuclear, you fire them up, you know what you're going to get. So I just find it extraordinary that the rural area is going to be decimated, food production is going to be impacted as the rice industry by a third in our area. I actually will struggle to farm if they put it through like they say they're going to. And there are other options that are just the lid's put on them. Let's have a look at them before decimating, well, in my area, at least 200 kilometres of productive agricultural area. Up at Wagga, another 200 kilometres. Down through Victoria to the South Australian border. Throw it out to the rural areas. Decimate out there. And we don't even use it, it's going to the cities. So, thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all appearing today. I think it's vitally important that the views that you hold are communicated to the metropolitan areas where the impact of what is being proposed will be felt in relation to lower power prices because of the lower transmission cost, but it means that you have to bear the brunt of that. And so in relation to that bearing the brunt, isn't it true that you would all prefer to have these power lines undergrounded? if they have to, impact your property. Would that be a fair assessment across the board? And I'm getting a lot of nods, just because Hansard can't record nods, but they have to record it.
Agreed.
So
Yes,
I will say that I'm seeing a lot of nodding, and then Hansard can record that.
Yes, but not in irrigated agriculture.
Yeah. So I worked out on the numbers that Transgrid provided our earlier hearings that per household, it would work out to be about $8 per power bill if we were to underground these lines as opposed to keeping them overhead. How do you feel about providing metropolitan areas an $8 cheaper power bill by being impacted with overhead power lines cutting your productive land? Anybody can go first.
I'm not happy with it at all, that my farm, just with the overlay, gets roughly a 25% loss in equity. With them up, gets a 55% loss in equity. Nothing to say about my neighbours, nothing to say about my schools, the man that I pay to drive my truck, the local supermarkets that we go to, the community that we support, the football clubs. We won't be able to do that. So everyone keeps saying cost, cost, cost. Cost to who? Cost to the taxpayer, cost to the government, cost to Transgrid shareholders, because that's who's most important to them, or cost to agriculture, or cost to me, cost to my productivity, for a generational encumberment of loss of equity. And as I said to Transgrid, there's no figure that you could give me that would repay that forever.
Mr. Bull, you look like you want to say something, then I'll come to Mr. Crawford.
Yeah, look, just briefly, I don't think anyone wants to impose increased costs on anyone else in this, but there is that increased cost on the farming community and the regions over a lot of these power lines across Australia right now. But the other point I have is we've got a lot of distrust right now in terms of what that number you quoted really means. Is it accurate? I'm seeing some creative wording in documents that can be read in a couple of different ways, which really concerns me when I look at some of the reporting. We've got a system where our major auditing companies have now been found out to actually not been doing it properly, and we want to sell this information back to the people who've got to possibly, where the infrastructure and where are the facts about that. And this goes beyond, we've got developers rolling up driveways wanting to lock people into agreements for renewable infrastructure with no real understanding of what our landscapes will look like. We've got no education across our community what the top-end thinking is of what this region and the renewable energy zone will look like in the future. So there's a lot of distrust and a lot of we want facts and we want honesty before you could even consider the future. But coming back to undergrounding solves a lot of issues. It will be more expensive, I'm sure, but it can also shorten the distance these power lines have to go. And I didn't do it at the start, but thank you very much for coming along today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Crawford.
Right, thank you. New South Wales has about 40% of the usage on the national energy market, or something like that. It used to be about 40%. Basically, you've got metered out around about 40% too, when you think of the whole network. And I was in Sydney the other day, and I asked one of the small business it was, and they flew into me pretty rapidly about the increase in power. And I went straight back and I said, if you knew where that was going, if, say, it was going into properly and correctly record the meterage, the actual power coming out of a solar farm or a wind farm or some renewable energy, they said, well, that'd be all right. So I think when you made the question about whether it was $8 per year or was it per
household
account, okay. I reckon they'd be in favour of that if they only knew it. So I really encourage you to take back, if we can measure something, then they'll be into it. They'd be like us, all thinking in the national interest, so to speak. But if they can't measure it and it's just a guesstimate, it's a hopeless situation, because whichever side of the compass you come at it from, if you can't prove something in a definitive way, there'll always be someone that doubts you. So I'm all for high voltage, direct current, measuring renewable farms, whatever you like, and especially these interconnectors. If you think about it, we were in the invidious position of Victorian distribution network doubting the amount of power that we were taking for Broken Hill. Look at this situation, I think it's going to be reversed. They want your power, New South Wales power, and if we went to the electorate and said, oh, we can't really measure it, we'll just have a guess, man, we're lost. I reckon they'd pay the $8 if they knew exactly what was going on.
Yeah.
And the only way you can do that is through direct current.
One of the things that we've also heard about the direct current lines is that they're needed converter stations to be converted to the AC current, and they come at the cost of $500 million each. So that this was one of the issues when looking at HVDC, because these lines are, for all intents and purposes, there to connect renewable energy infrastructure.
True.
Do you have any comments on that?
Yes. Looking at the renewable zones apropos the Murray River, there's a renewable zone designated on the New South Wales side, and there's one on the Victorian side. The Victorian's got a very strong transmission line going up that side. We've got a unused, if you like, not fully occupied by the transmission lines going on the north side. And I think we should not join the thing up here, not have this V&I West interconnector at this location. I think we should extend right out to Redcliffe and do that interconnection there. And that's where I'd put the DC measuring equipment. And that's where I'd spend $500 million, if you like. I wouldn't do it here because it looks and smacks like someone could be utilising your dispatchable power. It's too early in the loop. I'd take it right out and complete that network out at Redcliffe.
I was just going to ask...
We've only got a couple
I
of
do have
minutes.
questions. I wanted to
before?
go to Mr Redfern, if I may. You mentioned the issue with one endangered bird species here, bushstone curlews. Have you seen evidence of, or know of evidence of birds and wildlife being killed as a result of transmission lines in the area currently? Can you expand on that, please?
I've got a bushstone curlew in my deep freeze that got killed on a power line, and I've had others there too. Those and the roads have been the main issue we've had with our release program. I mean, obviously we've had to control feral animals that attack the birds, but no question about that.
And just to expand on that, that's because the rice growing, there's a lot of wetlands in the area attracting those birds. If you could expand on a little bit just to get it on the record again, please. So
beg your pardon?
That is just to expand on it.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, even under a swear line, which is a single line, it's commonplace to find dead birds. Yeah. Commonplace.
And bushstone curlews are endangered.
They are very much so.
Yeah. And this area attracts them because of
Well, we've had a breeding and release program on my property, and there's been a lot of survey work, and there's plenty of documentation to prove the results and all sorts of stuff. And also with the ANU Fenner group doing transect research there for at least 20 years. So there's plenty of evidence to prove my point. And the other birds, the painted snipe, which is even more endangered, and the Australasian bittern have been recorded numerous times on my property. But just to go further than that, I mean, it's not just the whole community and all the farmers are supportive of our actions against this business because of the community effects and the diminution of the whole area, really, if this goes ahead. And as far as undergrounding, if they underground it, near Moama for a short distance and then went overhead or whatever happens there's two corridors from Moama to Deniliquin, which is the shortest route, which was option 5, there's a railway corridor and there's a highway corridor. So, you know, the disruption would be much, much less than anything they're proposing out our way.
Just a clarification, just one, and it's Ms. Hare. You said at the beginning, am I correct in that the council knew about this in May last year, but are you inferring that the community just found out about it about 4 weeks ago?
Correct. That was one of my questions to Transgrid staff, was when, to two of them actually, when you first had meetings with our council, and they came back the following day, and when I asked the question again, if they had long enough to take it on notice, they told me 22nd of May 2022.
You didn't just clarify that 22 wasn't 23 and that was a typo?
No.
That's definitely 22.
Yes, I said to them, make sure I already know the answer because I'd read the meeting minutes.
Thanks so much. We'll now ask our next lot of witness to attend. Thank you for attending the hearing today. As we are tabling our report on the 31st of August, we have resolved you're not required to provide any answers to questions taken on notice or supplementary questions. So I'll now ask further for community members to come forward. Thank you.
Change.
Sorry.
And when you're ready, I welcome our next lot of witnesses now. If you could please, starting from my left, state your name and any relevant position title and swear either an oath or affirmation. You'll have an opportunity to make a short statement after we go through the oath.
Claire Martin, landholder in the area in question. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Be easy with my glass.
My name is Matthew Rowlands. I'm a chairman of the United Community Committee, representing in excess of 300 landholders, 200 school children and over 900 types of separate enterprise in our local community. I'm also a family member of multi-generational mixed farming enterprise, an employee of an agribusiness company servicing southern New South Wales, and a current and future farming member in our community. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. And I'd like to say thank you for your attendance in our community today.
Hi, my name's Nicole Fitzpatrick. I own a family farm in the area in question, and I'm also a primary school teacher at Moolameen Public School. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Good afternoon. My name is Alison Glenn. I'm part of a farming operation at Moolameen and representing the community today. Swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
And now if you would like to start by making a short statement, I'd just ask if you could keep it to a couple of minutes so we have time for questions at the end. Yeah.
My major thing has been submitted so I won't, it wasn't very major anyway, but anyway, I'll go to a statement that I thought of at 1 o'clock this morning. This has been very disturbing for everybody, I think I can safely say. It is less than 4 weeks since we first heard of Transgrid's plans to build a power line through our district. It is less than 4 weeks since we received correspondence from Transgrid telling us that our property is in the potential path of the power line. Like the diagnosis of a serious illness, we have quickly become aware of the symptoms and prognosis of what a 500 kV power line and all that it entails would mean to our lives and the lives of everyone in its path from Murrabit to near Jerilderie. We have repeatedly asked Transgrid at their meetings about the possibility of putting the line underground, and the responses have ranged from patronising to ridiculous, with no mention ever of their involvement in this inquiry. Since being asked to be a witness in this inquiry, I have spent hours reading the transcripts from proceeding sessions and now realise that time has made no real difference to Transgrid's dogged determination to use outdated 500 kilowatt kV above ground power lines for all their interconnector projects. We will not be cooperating with Transgrid in any way to progress this above ground line in our district. That's it.
Thanks, Claire. My submission that came to the committee was pretty short and everything, so I'll just give you a quick little overview and keep it brief. In line with a lot of our community members, on the 30th of June 2023, Transgrid wrote letters informing our community of draft corridors that would potentially be considered to travel through private landholders' properties in our communities. These letters were sent by postal services, of which some people never received, and failed to reach people until the earliest being the 7th of June 2023. 7th of July, 2023. The VNI West Corridor Report, New South Wales 2023, issued by Transgrid, gave our entire community a deceitful 11 days of opportunity to first respond with feedback in consideration to the draft corridors from the 17th of July, which was the first Q&A session of Transgrid's so-called consultation. Since this time, our community has been confronted by Transgrid. It has confronted our community in a manner of which they've conducted themselves in an inexcusable way. Large amounts of misinformation are not only held within these reports that they present to government and the community as they come along, and these misinformation and misleading facts and details have been both privately and publicly questioned by our community. On multiple occasions, these misleading and non-factual information that has been provided has been proven that it has been conducted in a most deceitful and dishonest way to our community. I would also like to make present that, as you will have heard from different people on your committee that have been witnesses and all that, that different regional reference groups have been told to our community publicly and privately, they've been consulted, have now come to light with our community in discussions that these plans, what they were consulted on, are completely different to what is happening now or what looks to be happening. Thank you.
The transmission infrastructure proposed by Transgrid at this stage is not due to run through my land. However, it is proposed to run through my neighbours' properties. There's many questions to be answered regarding whether this flood-prone area is the best route to take high-voltage power lines. But today we're discussing the importance of, if they have to go through, of why they should be underground. Lots have been said about the loss of value of places where the towers will be placed, but nothing has been said about the surrounding farms and the surrounding community, which will bear much of the cost. I was a teacher at Mellon Public School, which closed because of a lack of student numbers not long after the Murray-Darling Basin started recouping some of our water. I now teach at Moolameen Public School. If this goes through, we will lose people in our community. We will lose students, we will lose teachers, we will lose people in the community. The people who do all the jobs, do all the volunteering, do all the work. We've heard about fire hazards. We don't have a fire brigade. We're the fire brigade. My husband is on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a fire call. With limited basic training, he's expected to deal with fires and help those most in need. And you're expecting to put these power lines through our land and then leave us with not enough resources or personnel to deal with the repercussions. We've just recently had one of the most memorable floods in history, and it has been stated that once these power lines go in, levee banks cannot be altered in any way. So that means once these power lines are up, people can't increase their levee banks. So if the flood is coming, they are to be untouched, which means not only their farm will therefore go underwater, but therefore the neighbours, and the following flow-on effect that will have if you can't manage the flooding coming onto your land. Environmental factors, everybody likes to think that farmers are not environmentally friendly. We are doing our best, and we are making big gains and improvements in making our food one of the best in the world. And by putting these on agricultural land and in irrigation areas, you are not enabling to do this. You are also endangering wildlife, and to sum up, you're putting in a system that's outdated. Overhead power lines are not what countries are implementing. I don't know why you would implement a brand new system and then put in old technology to support it. It just doesn't seem to make sense.
I think most things have been said this morning, so I'll keep it brief. Community ripple, starting from the loss of agricultural income or land down through your hundreds of local businesses, as Nicole pointed out, schools, community groups, the capacity to be able to invite people back into your community, and those people being, for example, a school principal who provides a professional new investment of intellect to the community, which we don't have if we don't have any of those opportunities in our town. And the other thing that concerns me is that Transgrid, when they came to the consulting meetings, they mentioned it's not a fait accompli, but it sure did feel like it for our point of view. And no one valued our time. Transgrid were sitting at the table, and this is no disrespect to any of you people here today, sitting at the table being well paid, but had no respect for the amount of farmers who came for the day, or their wives. There was no respect for our business. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to questions.
Thank you very much. And I can tell the passion with which you're providing evidence today, and it's so evident in the way that it's coming across to us that you're really feeling the pressure of what's being, I guess, enforced on you. In relation to that, I think the provision of renewable energy is, in effect, designed to bring us towards net zero and, I guess, try and reduce our carbon output as a country. Primarily, I guess, for environmental reasons. But I'd be interested in your views where that environmental impact of reducing carbon is having a detrimental impact on prime agricultural land, of which you all have experience in. If you have a productive reduction in your output on your farms because of these projects, could you provide some insight into how much loss of productivity that might mean, what that would mean for food production into the future? Because whilst offsetting carbon emissions is one thing, the food and fibre in order to clothe and feed and resource our nation is another environmental problem. So it seems to me in part that it shifts the burden from one part to another. Do you have some views on that and what it would mean for this area to have a reduction in the output of food and fibre?
I think one of the biggest concerns that we have with renewables and transmission lines in particular in our area is that effect on production in our community. Now that's definitely evident. We've seen that through Murray-Darling Basin plans. We've seen that through drought. We've just recently seen that through one of the biggest floods we've had in living memory. I can tell you now that those effects on productivity in the future won't affect our community in that. And I say that in that manner because they are currently affecting our community. It's happening right now. It's been happening for years. And when we talk about the demographic scale of that effect, we talk about not only regions of where the food and fibre may be produced, but we actually, in fact, include larger regional towns, of which some people in those towns are unaware of what happens outside, and that's fine. But the bigger regional towns and cities even in our area are solely driven by the agricultural industry that surrounds them. That's schools, that's industries, that's hospitals. It becomes into things like the funding we receive as our communities grow. It's crippling our community at the moment. We've seen it happen with everything that's gone on in the last decade and further back than that, of course, but it definitely is going to crush production and efficiencies. There's no doubt about it because it's happening right now. And the toll that is taking on not only people's business lives, but their personal lives, personal mental health, and their children's future it's as evident as it's ever been, and it's a real concern.
It's been known for ages that farming costs are going up. Fertiliser goes up, chemical goes up. What doesn't go up is our profits. They seem to be going down. We'll sell a whole sheep at market and get $160 for the whole lot. And then you go to Woolies and you buy a leg for $40 or $50, and as you can see, it doesn't equate. We're the ones working long hours, late at night, 24 hours a day. My children, my son, my daughter, they help out. We will run our headers 24 hours a day to complete harvest in enough time to get our crops off before rain comes so that people in the city can have food on their tables, and good food with regulated water, chemicals that aren't allowed to be applied that are detrimental to your health. But the question is, if you keep putting our costs up, why are we going to keep doing it? I say to my husband, you can't keep working these hours. Why would we not sell and do something else? You know, yes, it's a lifestyle choice. My kids love it, we thrive on it, we enjoy it, but there does come a point, if it's not financially viable, you are going to get people leaving the industry. And if you talk of losses on property, you suddenly declare someone's property has 40% less value, how are they going to make their mortgage repayments?
I've got a lot more questions, but I know at the time, so I'll let other members...
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you all for coming today, making the time. I just wanted to, actually first to Mr. Rowlands, your submission and your opening statement refers to the behaviour of Transgrid. I just wanted to get a little bit more information for the committee about the, you say in your submission, even threatened our community in terms of that behaviour. Would you like to put that on the record?
Yep, I can do that for you. I won't go into too much detail as the numbers of times that this has happened in our community that can be proven. A great example that I'll hold in the most simplest form for people to understand is, of course, we know the VNI West project has come into our community with 4 to 5 weeks' notice. We know other areas in our community have had more time than that, lots more time, like 12 or 18 months more. But to make it simply for you to give you one example is, and being a part of the committee, we're constantly talking with our community as our rural communities do, always communicating. The instance of a family that had been confronted by Transgrid to have some private consultation, or so it was called, private consultation, of which the lady had great concerns about how close these transmission lines would come to her house. It was assured by Transgrid staff that these lines would have a limit of no closer to her personal residence of 500 metres. Now, while she wasn't happy with that, at least they'd given some sort of boundary that was perceived to be factual or even legislated. Then in turn, approximately 10 days, 12 days, 2 weeks later, we attended our public meeting that was given to us on the 17th of July 2023, and the same question was raised to another half a dozen, 7 staff that were there represented by Transgrid. They then led to inform our community that 300 metres was the example of which it could come to a personal residence. Days later or weeks later at these so-called consultation walk-up meetings for our community, I raised the question once again. I was then told with a different answer that these boundaries are in fact not legislated to how close it can come. I can go on, and I'm happy to provide the evidence that I have if you need to. That's a great example for you, but the deceitful manner in which this company, who's been employed to do this job, is conducting themselves, and we've seen that with regional reference groups giving evidence that they were planned on areas that, this is where it's going to go, and we consulted with them and everything, and then the goalposts have been moved.
I attended one of the meetings in Moolameen. It was during the day, 10 till 4, which is great if you've got a job to attend, but I did. I was sat down with 4 Transgrid people and myself. I was sitting at the table at the bowling club, and I said, I would like to talk about, there is no other option. This is the route it is going. This is the route that it will be put through. I said, but what if you don't get people? We will compulsory acquire land. This is what the state government wants. This is where it is going, and there is no other options.
If I could make a comment also about, from Transgrid's point of view, when questioning about undergrounding, specifically on all contact. I've brought up undergrounding in person or at the question and answer meetings, and we've been given really the silliest responses. It would contaminate the soil, the width of the trenches would be way wider and more detrimental to the environment than overhead power lines. It can't be done because of every sort of ridiculous thing. The weight of the cables being brought up to be put in the ground is terribly heavy. For goodness sake, they're talking to people who are dealing with major machinery and are totally aware of the sorts of things that, such a lot of talk about this contaminated soil being brought up that I said, how deep are the trenches? And they said 1 metre. We make channels, not weekly, but a lot that are way deeper than that. And silly things. And that's been repeated, I notice, in the transcripts of Transgrid's. In fact, the sound of Transgrid in these transcripts is exactly what we've found. They are very patronising when you ask about underground, and at no time did they mention that they'd actually done comparative costing and that it had been almost thrown out and that this inquiry had come from that. Undergrounding for our position, from my position and my husband's and our family, would be the answer, but we feel that if it was underground, the route would be so reconsidered because it is totally to avoid all the things like the ski race that we've heard about once a year, terribly important. It would be changed anyway if it was underground, but they would not entertain any discussion about underground at any of the the meetings we had with them.
We heard evidence in the inquiry that the undergrounding option, given the cost in terms of the current regulated system, it wouldn't pass the regulator. So even if we wanted to underground it, it wouldn't go ahead because of the AER or the regulation that's in place at the moment. Do you have any?
I do. The regulation is clearly at fault. Reading Simon Bartlett's, their evidence, it's the regulation that is the problem. Transgrid can get away with this cheap technology because they're meeting that RIT, is it, or whatever it is, the test. They themselves, Transgrid, while telling us about these ludicrous reasons for why they can't underground for us, have put a state-of-the-art undergrounded 300 kV line recently into Sydney, which has fibre optic monitoring. They've told us they'd nearly have to dig up the line every week to check if it's all right here. Just silly things that they've told us. And ultimately it has come down to cost. And they can get away with not having to put it underground. And it's meeting the test, This is the problem.
Just one quick question, and thank you all very much for your time today. If it was possible to underground the line, would that be acceptable to you individually and to the broader community, do you believe?
I'll just speak to that first, if that's okay. Just in regards, I think, obviously your reasoning for running your committee and what you're doing is quite important, and that's involved with the undergrounding. My representation and the people that we represent, I think the process of which private companies are conducting themselves in Australian communities would be a first step of tying our shoelaces before we take our first step. And it's the manner of which, obviously, the renewables aspect of things is, it might have to happen, and that's okay, but why are we taking these great unplanned, misleading steps well before our first steps? These companies that are employed to do this, that's undergrounding, okay, it's a much more favourable idea than overheads, and I think you've managed to find that as, you've gone through your hearings and all that. But before we even get into that, there's got to be a great reform on how these private companies are conducting themselves in a manner and what benefits that gives to, one, the communities affected, and two, the nation at large, with the next 50 to 100 years in mind.
I would say yes, we would be infinitely happier with underground than overhead power lines. We also have been approached during this period by a company wanting to install wind turbines on one of our properties with no idea of how that would be transmitted back to the grid. They suggested we could use this, VNI, which is not true. So we were expected to sign a 2-year exclusivity document so that they could, assess, I guess, the wind on our property, without no idea of transmission. If we are going to have these renewable energy projects dotted all over our land, and we even agree to them because there's some enormous benefit financially, what about the transmission of those projects, and what will our landscape look like if there isn't some sort of built-in factor? And coming back to the regulator, they don't have to look at transmission. That isn't their problem. And we've heard, and it's totally gossip, but that particular wind farm operator has said they are going to try and convince Transgrid to put in a transmission line which would be compulsorily acquired across land back to, I guess, the Jerilderie, because that's the property I'm talking about. So I'd say underground for all transmission, and it should be built into the cost of any renewable energy project that's mooted. It's happening in Victoria, and it has to happen. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to land an aeroplane in our area.
Yes, I'd just like to say that if we have to have this development, then let's put it underground. If it's a must-be, let's look at the realistic best route possible, the straightest route. We've been told that it must be straight. We can't be bending the line. Let's put it on a already created easement, such as a disused railway line or a TSR, or for goodness sake, what an invention, let's put it underground and build a road on top of it. Or run it down the side of the road already created easement. There are so many options.
Personally, I believe that the people that I've spoken to, that there is no point having a conversation about above ground lines. It will not be accepted. They will not agree to it. You can offer them all the money in the world. You know, would you like an 80-metre tower in your backyard? It's that simple. My backyard might be a little bit bigger to yours, but I still worked hard to get it, and I'll work hard every day. Do you want an 80-metre tower to look at? Regardless of all the other things that come with it, you wouldn't like it in your backyard. You can't expect to put it in other people's. And when you said before that it's $8 cost, that is ridiculous. $8, what? A coffee a day added to the bill when you said before? We can't wear the cost. The country cannot keep wearing the cost so that the city people get what they want. The cost has to be shared.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you, for attending this hearing today. As the inquiry, again, will be tabling its report on 31st of August, the committee's resolved you are not required to provide any answers to questions taken on notice or supplementary questions. That concludes our first portion of the hearing today. We'll have a short lunch break and come back for the public forum, which will start at 1 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm serious, Liz. I really am. I feel I need this.
Okay, we might restart again, and I'll welcome you all to today's public forum for the Standing Committee on the feasibility of undergrounding the transmission infrastructure for renewable energy projects in New South Wales. This session is an opportunity to hear directly from the people of this community and their views on transmission infrastructure. Thank you all for coming. Before we commence, I would like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's public forum. Speakers were asked to register in advance for the public forum. Those of you who have been registered to speak will be called up to the table in turn. If time allows at the end of these speakers that have registered, anyone in the audience who wishes to speak will be invited to do so, so please just indicate to us. You'll have approximately 5 minutes to speak to the committee. What you say today is being transcribed and streamed live to the Parliament's website and will be included as evidence to the inquiry. It's also important that I note again that while all participants are covered by parliamentary privilege, committee hearings and public forums are not intended to provide a forum to make adverse reflections about others under the protection of parliamentary privilege. In that regard, it is important that participants focus on the issues raised by the inquiry terms of reference and avoid naming individuals unnecessarily. Finally, can I sincerely thank those who have come along today to speak to the committee. It's important that the committee hears from the people that transmission infrastructure for renewable projects will have an impact on. It will help to shape our report, and it will formulate what we hope are important recommendations for the government. Thank you. Now welcome our first forum participants. Got Sally Dye, John Lolicato, sorry if I mispronounce your name, and Matt Rowlands. If you would like to come forward. And if I could again just ask you to introduce yourself and before beginning your statements, please.
Sally's not going to take minutes now and distribute them? Yeah. Thanks.
Hello, Madam Chair. My name's Sally Dye, and we live on a property between Deniliquin and Moolameen. We've got about 46,500 acres, and 17 kilometres of this power line has to run through the middle of our property. I'm well versed in what the potential impacts are of this, financially and on our emotions, because it's been an extremely fraught time. We were only notified that we were in the path of this at the beginning of July, and it was hearsay. Actually, Neil rang and said, "Are you aware?" And I said, "No, we haven't been contacted." Went to a public forum, and there we were notified by Transgrid that effectively it was going to be a compulsory acquisition, whether we liked it or not. So yesterday, actually, we had 2 men come out and want to speak to us about getting access to our property to start running the preliminary things, which seems a bit premature to me, given that this line doesn't seem to be necessary, according to the Plan B from Simon Bartlett and Bruce Mountain. It just seems a complete waste of time to explore this option until they've looked at other alternatives. When we said to them about undergrounding, they're not even considering undergrounding. Not a single option in their proposal paper mentions undergrounding at all. It's just not on their radar, and they're not going to do it unless they're forced to do it. The only reason this option has been put on the table is because the Victorian Minister put an order out in May ordering that this line had to come through and cross the river where she ordered it to cross the river from Kerrang. So we're pretty angry. The Victorian Minister has the power to order this, and we're hoping the New South Wales Minister has the power to force this underground through New South Wales. We do intensive irrigation, cropping and pasture, as well as dryland grazing on our country. We use gyrocopters and drones because if there's one thing, farmers are required for best practice to maintain our social licence to operate. We're innovative and we like to do things properly so that we have minimal impact on the environment and a maximum output. When we looked into what Transgrid was going to do to our enterprise, apart from devaluing our asset and creating an eyesore, which I'd like to say, at the moment, we can stand anywhere in a 7,000 acre paddock on our place or and look around and you can't see any sign of human habitation. It's completely native. It's all natural, and it's a really good soul-filling, joyous time to stand out there and look around and there's no sign of man. But back to the gyrocopters and drones. Farmers are innovative, and we achieve our social licence by having minimal impact. When these power lines go in, we have a huge issue because we use gyros and drones, more gyrocopter than drones at the moment, but we're getting better with the drones, to check our stock waters and check our stock. And it saves a huge amount of time. What would normally take a day and a half or a day takes an hour and a half. So it's been a huge innovation for our business. That won't be allowed anymore. Can't fly within 60 metres of the power lines. But the problem we have there is that from our own risk management perspective, we're not going to risk anyone on our place flying around with a power line like that through it. We're just not prepared to take that risk. So we've got to completely change the way we manage our stock and stock waters, go back to how we used to do it. But anyway, we also use aviation to spray our crops and different things in our pastures. That will no longer be able to be done. When they came out to see us, they said to us, well, look, it's a 10-kilometre wide corridor through your place for 17 kilometres. Where do you want the power line? And we said, we don't want the power line. And they said, well, you're getting a power line. So I said at that point, so does that make us, you're expecting us now to be the pragmatic pissed off, excuse my French. And he laughed and said, well, yes, probably. We were not happy about it at all. Climate change is upon us, and the problem we have is that 45-degree days where we are, stinking hot northwesterly dry winds, and if we're expecting more extreme events under climate change, the way it pans out at our way is that we end up with the winds and dust storms. Now, everyone knows dust and smoke create arcing from these major power lines and start fires. Our nearest neighbours are 18 kilometres to the east, 18 kilometres to the west, and there's 2 or 3 of us living on our property at any one time. There is nobody to fight fires out there, and if it's going to happen more often, we are so at risk. Fire insurance is becoming increasingly prohibitively expensive, as with all insurance with climate change. And when I asked Transgrid twice at public forums about their fire insurance, because of the risk that it posed, no one from Transgrid would answer. I said, well, who carries the risk for the fires that start? There was no answer at all. I gather they just socialise them across the expense when they've got to pay out when it's proven that they're liable, but they don't admit liability was the indication that I got. So I would suggest that if anyone's got to have an easement to overhead power lines, that it's part of their easement agreement that they have a certificate of currency for fire insurance for their liability written into it. That should absolutely be necessary because, yeah, I think I've made the point. It's just so dangerous. It's stock losses, fencing losses, feed losses. You can't insure against feed losses, and it doesn't come back for however long after a fire. The World United Nations have always said that in Article 3 of their Framework Convention on Climate Change, that parties should take precautionary measures to anticipate, prevent or minimise the causes of climate change and mitigate its adverse effects. That was 23rd of October 2020. New South Wales needs to apply the precautionary principle. New South Wales needs to put these power lines underground. I would say that undergrounding these power lines, we wouldn't have nearly as much of a problem. Like, it would still be an issue, having something straight through the middle of your property, particularly when they're installing it. But I question the validity of what Transgrid are saying, because I listened very carefully to what they said about undergrounding. And every time it was raised at a public forum, and I think I've been to 4 of them now, and met with them privately as well. They say the construction costs of undergrounding are 3 to 10 times dearer. Well, we're not in rock country, we're in soft country. It's a variety of soft soils, but a metre down there's no rock. So it would be cheap, or relatively cheap, certainly against other things. But what they don't tell you is that's the construction cost. But I think the total cost of putting poles and wires in would actually be much more expensive, because the resulting compensation for devaluation and all the other things that go with it, the land use changes that we're going to have to do, change our crops from crops that require aerial applications. Once you compensate for all of these things and not just acquire the easement, and undergrounding has smaller easements, narrower easements, I think they'd be far more comparable in cost. And I don't think that any one of the big companies is being upfront and honest in providing figures about okay, they've got the construction costs, but they have no idea of the implications of the compensation costs. One of the concerns that we've raised, and we're waiting for legal opinions, and we're waiting on financial advice as well. Our assets are pre-capital gains tax assets, and we're seeking clarification that the requirement of an easement over these for the power lines won't create a capital gains tax event on a pre-capital gains tax asset. We're still waiting, because this asset's been in the family for 3 generations and is definitely pre-capital gains tax, and to have a $35 million property suddenly become a capital gains tax active asset, so that when we sold it in the future, it would be hit with capital gains tax is a major impact. And how do you compensate for that? I'm just flabbergasted at the lack of information that Transgrid will actually give us. They say, go and get your own advice. We can't provide advice on tax. We can't provide advice on anything, which is fair enough to a point, but they could give us some case studies that prove one way or another as to whether these things are actually, really things that we need to be concerned about, or whether they've been dealt with in some previous way. The other issue is, as far as New South Wales tax is concerned, is there are some entities that potentially will be hit with land tax. Now, farming country is not currently, doesn't have to pay annual land tax. However, if the compensation payments, it's my understanding, and I may be wrong, but if the compensation payments received as a one-off for these things at the beginning, they're taxed as income in that year. So if you're entitled to $800,000, you lose 25% off the top. So suddenly you're only getting $600,000 of value out of the $800,000 compensation. But if that's more than what your income in that year is, and agricultural production fluctuates with climate and everything else, you can actually find yourself in a situation where that entity gets hit with land tax that year. So land tax on $35 million asset is not insubstantial, and you'd expect that they would have to write land tax into the compensation payments.
Ms. Dom, I might ask you to wrap up your remarks, and if we still have time at the end, I'm happy to. I'm just mindful that there may be other people that want to speak as well.
Okay, well, I've just put table to submission, if that's okay.
Got it. Thank you.
So there's a summary of the cost benefit as to why I believe that the undergrounding, once that's looked at properly, would be a much better and much more acceptable thing to the community. And thank you so much for coming and listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. As I introduced myself as a witness before, I'm Matt Rowlands. I'm the current chairman of the United Community Committee, representing in excess of 300 landholders, 200 school children and over 900 types of enterprise in our local community that will be affected by transmission lines going ahead. I'm also a family member of a multi-generational mixed farming enterprise, of which has been built over 3 to 4 lifetimes, an employee of an agribusiness company servicing southern New South Wales, a current and future farmer in our local community. I would like to take the time to speak to the committee and thank them for their time. It's not very often our community gets access to people like yourselves, and it's a credit to you for taking the time to come here. So I just want to go over a couple of things I think that during your whole process of everything you're doing, you should consider. And I think a great way to express that is ask a question of, and I'll use a tree as a metaphor, is when is the best time to plant a tree? And I can answer that for you. It's 25 years ago. Good people do things for other people, smart people, progressive people, plant trees today because it's the second best time that we can. And we plant those trees knowing that we will never sit in the shade of them, yet our future generations will. So as a committee, I would like you to consider, obviously you're doing a great job considering the fact of the overhead lines and considering that they need to go underground, and we appreciate that as a community. What I would ask you to take back to your colleagues and in your own time in your business is the fact that who are we employing to conduct these activities in our nation, and specifically in our state at the moment. Our community that stretches from the Murray River to Jerilderie and the people that we're involved in communicating with are sick to death and fed up of lies, misleading information, and private companies acting in a disgusting, deceitful manner, of which is happening right now and has happened over the last couple of years in our communities. And I can tell you from many accounts of dealing with a lot of people in the last 4 to 5 weeks, as well as every account I have in my day-to-day personal job, people are at breaking point. And these private companies are the cause of it. This is happening in our area, and people are having these people come in and sit at their kitchen table and tell them one thing, to then turn up to public meetings within weeks and tell them a different thing, continually questioning and can't be answered or is answered in a deceitful and lying, misleading manner, and we are sick to death of it. Not only affecting future generations, you're affecting the people in our communities right now. So I just want, as a good example, to table 3 documents here that came out of Transgrid. It's the V&I West Draft Corridors Report 2023 June. There's 3 documents there that come from their draft corridor report and the issues that we have with them. The first one being a map that displays the flood-prone areas which would constitute restriction of transmission lines in their area. Unfortunately, the entire area from the Murray River to Moolameen and east and west in both directions in New South Wales, as you can see when you have a look at this, is not mapped as flood-prone land. Personal accounts that I can provide with you demonstrates that thousands upon 1,000 acres of our land was under 3 to 5, 6 foot of water for months. People's infrastructure, their livelihoods, their livestock, all damaged, perished, homes lost. So it's absolutely disgusting that a company would come into our community and present a finding like this, let alone not being able to identify who businesses are, who leading industries are in our community, and then stand up and privately and publicly conduct themselves in the manner that they have. It is unacceptable. So I'd like the committee to consider as they go along, and I'm sure there'll be future committees as renewables come into play and everything, that how are we monitoring these private companies that we are employing to make sure they are doing the right thing? How are we doing that? And how do we do that going forward? Because I know in my own community, and I know in other communities, it will no longer be tolerated to be treated as second-class citizens just because there's been a little bit of pushback from other communities, and at the last minute we'll have something dropped on us like this. It won't happen. So I just ask the committee that they consider going forward from now, if undergrounding becomes an option, which I hope it does, because it will solve some small parts of our issues, that they consider how they manage or how the, employing these companies, how they manage these companies to conduct themselves in a manner that is ethical and professional. Because unfortunately, they seem to be doing that in that manner, and I don't know about anyone else that runs a business, is raising a family, is active in their community. It wouldn't fly for 1 minute in anyone else's life, not a single minute. Respect is earned, not given. And currently these companies who are railroading these projects to push through in our communities have earned zero respect, and their credibility is now tarnished and lost. There's some other maps here I'd like you to consider as well with your migrating bird paths and different things they've missed out there. I'll highlight the fact that they talk about in their reports, and this will continue with undergrounding projects. There'll be problems you'll run into if that's a consideration as well, about these Ramsar wetlands, and the fact that our community is a huge corridor for wildlife and environmental factors in the times of droughts, floods, for flora and fauna to have access to these other safe havens. And I'd also just present a finding that this is the map that was presented to our community with 6 options at a community meeting of the proposal of the corridors that may be considered. Until it was questioned at our community meeting, it was portrayed as though these 6 options were being investigated as to which was the best one. And when questioned, we were told that all other options had been discontinued and option 1 was the preferred route. Our community was given 11 days to produce feedback from that meeting. That is the manner in which these private companies are acting actively in our state and our country and our homes. And this is the reason why we will no longer tolerate the activities that are going on. So please consider that going forward in any projects that you may have, present findings to and everything, that this is happening, and it's happening here and now. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Excuse me. Was there anyone else that would like to speak? That was all the people that we had registered to speak for the public forum. Is there anyone else that would like to speak for 5 minutes? If you could come forward. Thank you. Thanks so much. And if you could just start with your name and a title if you have one already.
Hi, I'm Alina Berger. We've just recently bought a farm in the Moolameen area, and I also work for a ag merchandise company in Barham. So my main concern, well, there's a few concerns with this, but we bought the property on a personal level. We bought the property at the start of May. In June, a letter was sent to my parents because they were the owners of the property beforehand. We haven't actually personally received any communications from Transgrid at all. The map of our property, my husband looked at it and he goes, I can't see where it is. Where is it? I said, that's because the whole area is shaded. It is only a small property. It's almost 2,000 acres. It has been in the family since the early 50s and is a rice growing farm. So we have bought it with the intentions of growing rice and have potentially got the Transgrid line going straight through it, which would ruin it for rice and of course devalue what we've just bought. On a work level, we service quite a lot of rice growers in the area, and the Murray Valley is, especially the Western Murray Valley, east as well. We're very dependent on the water allocation for our area, so when there is water, we need to make the most of what we can out of our land, and rice growing is the most suitable for our area to make the most amount of money per hectare out of our area. The process of growing rice in our area, although it's not as regulated now as it used to be, we have had to have all of our land drilled and assessed for suitability to grow rice. So in that, we've got to show that our ground actually does not use huge amount of water to be able to inundate to grow rice. So we've all had to have the ground in years past, all has had to be drilled and surveyed for that. And that whole area being a floodplain, there is sandhills amongst it, which obviously aren't rice growing areas, but that whole area around the Moolameen, Malul, Barham towards Deniliquin area, is the floodplain areas, is all low water use areas because they are the floodplain areas. So that's what makes it so perfect for growing rice. So to wipe out that area of rice growing would have a major impact to heaps of people personally, but also to a lot of the businesses around Deniliquin, Swan Hill, Moolameen, all of those areas. So I did have Transgrid say to us that we can't fly planes, but they're going to review the use of drones when I questioned it, because we could potentially fly drones underneath the lines to be able to still do our crop protection, so for herbicides and pesticides and so forth, and they said they'll review it. I know as a fact that that's actually a CASA law as well. It's not them that does it. So it was just it was another one of the disappointing examples of what felt like lies being told to us so that we would agree to it. Yeah, so we've got, potentially we've got 20 years of paying back a farm that we might get compensated a small amount of what we're going to have to be paying back. And my husband and I have both got shares in the business that we own as well. Shares in the business we work at, sorry. So we will be impacted on both, even though we do have outside income, on both fronts, as well as just a community impact too. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Was there anyone else that wanted to speak today? If you could come forward. You can go, if you want to go back, you can, and we can call you back up if there's time at the end. Yeah.
Okay.
These are all right.
We saw your name on your shirt.
Yep. I'm Donald Bull. I'm north of Carnargo, fourth generation farmer in that area, which is basically mainly large grazing country with some irrigation. I'm looking at between, depending, and as we've discussed today, the maps are very vague, but between 15 and 20 kilometres of possible power lines through our property. I'll just go back 30 odd years, 40 years. In January the 16th, 1987, all our country was totally burnt out when a fire ravaged from the Hay Road, which was approximately 30 plus k's away from west of us, and it burnt 30 k's east of us. And that was started by a power line, by a power pole that had blown over on a 42-degree day with a hot northerly wind blowing. It devastated the whole community out there. I think it was something like 22,000 sheep were burnt, many cattle were burnt, plus all the vegetation, fencing. It was like starting your whole property again. I never want to see that again. Just prior to that, through our property along the Moonbury Road, a power line was put in, which is still there today, and that's, I think it's a 120 kVA line or whatever they quote them as. This one we're talking now is 520, so nearly five times the size. My memories of that power line, we had to sign basically a disclaimer for health reasons. And I've asked, this time last week I had a Transgrid rep in my house, and I said, I'm really concerned about the health issues. If you drive under our power line that's existing there now, your radio doesn't work in your ute, there's obviously a lot of energy coming off those power lines. And I said to him, how healthy is this for me to have men mustering under these power lines? And his comment was, I wouldn't want my kids to play under this line. And that basically answered my question, I take it. I to this day advise my staff not to sit under the power lines when they're on buggies or bikes mustering. We've also, through our property, we've got a critically endangered species called the plains wanderer. And as I say, we don't know exactly where the line's going, but it's almost certainly it's going to come across a lot of primary habitat. And Transgrid have been, and I only found out about this on the 20th of July. No time to reflect, and I haven't prepared anything. I've just come in here. Anyway, Transgrid have bought a property about 30 kilometres north of us to offset the habitat onto this property. And I said to the guy, the Plains Wanderer is flightless. What, are you going to go and pick these birds up, take them up 30 k's north, are you? Well, he couldn't answer that, obviously. And there's obviously flora as well as and fauna, other types that could be affected. But our property, we use aerial sprayers. I've also led to believe that if we have another fire, that the water planes are not allowed to go very close to these power lines, which is out in our country, there's no channels, there's no rivers. It's open plain country, and you will not stop a fire unless you have help from the air. Also, on a personal note, we use planes to spray our irrigation property. So it could have severe impacts on a lot of our management practices. And very similar to what Sally's story is, same sort of type of country, big grazing paddocks, and we do not want this power line.
Thank you.
We don't want it over the top.
Thank you. Was there anyone else that wanted to come forward and speak today? Yeah, come forward.
Hello. Oh, sorry. My name is Charlton Glenn. I am a third-generation farmer from the Moolameen region. I also, like Matt, work for an agricultural private business. I am of the opinion of everyone else here today that the power line overhead is not a great thing, but particularly because, as Alina said, we're a rice-growing region. It would decimate 50% of the job that I currently do as an agronomist, and it is also a passion of mine. But also my family, we're in the process of discussing what a future looks like for our farm. Rice is currently 50% of our farm. The other 50% is grazing. Now, if we get rid of rice, I don't see a foreseeable future for myself to go home. I can't envisage that there will be enough income or there is enough industry for my dad, my sister, myself, my mum, and potentially our future partners and families to come home and have a viable future. We're very passionate about what we're doing, but if Transgrid comes into our region and they're not willing to actively consultate, look at other options, what hope do we have for future generations of farmers or people who want to work in agriculture, who want to come out here to regions to move back? I would have to look at getting another job. Yes, I have other skill sets outside of agriculture, but it's not what I enjoy doing or not what I'd like to do. My boss, for example, there is 5 of us in our business. 3 out of 5 of us are involved in rice growing farms, and we also do rice for work. If we don't have rice as a job, he loses 3 people from his business as employees. Their kids no longer live here, they can't go to school. We're here for a long term and generations. The Transgrid people who are coming in and providing jobs for the construction are only here for the foreseeable future. They're not sustainable in long term. Their kids aren't going to come to our school. They're not going to grow up. They're not going to marry local farmers. So I just thought, as one of the only people in the room who's 30 years and under, I thought we should probably have a voice today. So thank you very much for your time and for coming.
So much. Was there anyone else that wanted to come forward and speak? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
My name's Robert Bolton. I come from a former farming family, but my background now is construction management, project management, and dealing with what I would call complex projects. We've got an example here today talking about complex projects, and I actually attended a Transgrid meeting about 6 weeks ago, and it was an interesting conversation with the other engineers talking engineering talk. But talking about process particularly, I'm not sure whether you're upper house or lower house in there. A couple of process points. First of all, the compensation. Has the committee considered the mineral rights below where these power lines are going? Now, in particular, there's a large mineral sands operation in Balranald and one further north. I understand they're exploring in this area. So do you add the future earnings to these people we just heard for the rare earths and the other mineral sands that are available under this land? And will whatever proposal they have, so we're talking about, I think, a 60-metre high power lines, 450 metre apart, how does the easement and access work? Okay, now, to add to that point, I think the committee should look at the jurisdiction conflict that happened in Queensland in the in situ gasification issue, where the Petroleum Act and the Coal Act was in conflict and innovation was not able to go through for a couple of mining companies. This has all happened around the Chinchilla area in Queensland. I think that's a precedent you as a parliamentary committee should look at. Okay, point one. Point two, bonds for the farmers and any work that gets started on their property and not gets completed. I've been talking to a number of contractors about various renewable projects that are happening around New South Wales and Victoria. A rule of thumb is that these wind farms, the Transgrid power lines and the solar farms are about 50% mechanical and electrical and 50% civil. The civil sides have been underestimated, and most of the complaints from farmers are mainly due to the contractors running out of money and not being able to finish the work to what would be a normal standard. Now, once again, I would ask this committee to look at other parts of New South Wales, in particular the mining operations, where they do put that in legislation and force the mining companies to do it. But as you heard from these people here, it doesn't appear to be applying to Transgrid. So that's something I think this committee should be looking at. And usually you would have some form of bond. There's a number of different ways of doing that. And the final thing is, I think it's useful to do a timeline of what has happened on this. This has been the fastest $3 to $4 billion development I've seen in my career, and I've seen a few. So if you're familiar with the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, Darling Harbour, and about 40 to 50 kilometres of Hume Highway, I have seen a few of these sort of construction projects. Yep. So it's just adding to what the people here, to me it's more of a process issue, and if you have a look at things like what happened with the Inland Rail, it's the same thing. They're cutting short on the budget, and that's where you will find all the feedback, the negative feedback you're getting from these people. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Was there anyone else that wanted to come forward to speak? Still have about 20 minutes left of the public forum. Di, did you want to come back forward? Did you have any additional remarks? I know I feel like I cut you off. Sorry.
No, that's all right. Did you have any questions?
We can't ask questions in the public forum, unfortunately.
Afterward?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Brownrigg. I'm now a resident of Griffith, and I am advising Helen Dalton MP. I'm not making a political comment here in my capacity as an advisor to her.
Could you speak into the mic a bit further?
Yes,
Sorry.
I would just like to make the committee, I would like to make the committee aware of an article in the Financial Times of London from July 30 this year, regarding the massive inflation in electrical cables for these projects and interconnectors, and a huge world demand for these materials. and a huge number of projects very similar to V&I West and Hume. And July 30, Financial Times, if the committee could refer to that, I can actually make that article. I'm a subscriber to Financial Times. I could make that article available to the committee because I think I haven't heard any comment or information about the huge inflation in costs for interconnectors and the actual cables that go into these projects. So that's all I have to say, really.
Thank you. Was there any additional people that wanted to speak for the public forum? Now's your time.
I thought just while we had the opportunity, we might get the committee to consider also the way the timelines of these projects are happening in reference to currently, as we see we're faced with overhead transmission lines, and obviously the work you're doing is to provide some evidence on the necessity for underground lines. I just wanted to make the point that into the future, I have no doubt our state and especially our community that I represent will face more issues, especially with net zero requirements that are coming between 2030 and 2050. I just wanted to make it a consideration that the committee possibly have some protocols or take something back that these timelines and the way, I know we spoke about a witness speaking about the way that the consultation is presented, newspapers and country people accessing that. It's sort of the question of why hasn't this been thought of prior to? Yes, different entities have timelines that they have to act on and everything like that, but why is that at the detriment of our communities and people's livelihoods? It's not through our communities misplanning or poor research that we suffer. So I'd just like to make that point that if you continue to down this road as we're going to with renewables going forward, that maybe we need to present some statutory sort of protocols for timelines, for consultation, for the manner in which these companies that are employed by our state are conducting themselves. Because presently it's a terrible reflection of both the companies we're employing, but it's a bit like the homework our state's doing to protect the people that live in it. So why aren't we making sure that these are planned and we have a plan that has to happen by 2028? Why aren't we thinking about that and just taking the small steps one by one? And I think it's never been more evident than a project like this that's happening that the plans are sort of there, but we've just got to get it done so it doesn't matter. And it does, because of the effect that it's going to have. And, you've been all over the state and everything, and now you're aware of all the effects. So please just consider the fact that we need some tight protocols around these companies that we're employing and what they are bound by and how they have to perform, rather than them dictating, well, this is how we'll do it and we'll just go through it. And it may differ from what's actually happening in our local communities. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? You come forward, please. Please come forward. If you all want to come forward, and we've got 15 minutes, so you'll likely all be able to speak.
So I've composed myself now after this morning. One of the community concerns for landholders would be that when you have an overshadowing of a possible transmission line or a development of any of that scale. It's the future planning where people are questioning what their future planning will be as to if they change the direction of their industry. So they might be thinking of going from rice, for example, into another a grain or livestock, and should they be commencing that development? It could be a very financially burdening exercise, and to have that shadow across the country, how do you make that decision based on what if? And I think that the possibility of holding people back when it's very uncertain for people to make a future and to hold on to their future, and encouraging the future generations to say, please come on board, we would like you to be welcome in our family industry. However, there is a chance that this overriding development could decrease our yearly income or our income forever, and then it reflects on your ability to have the aggression to go out and purchase the farm next door. I think this goes without saying. We're multi-generational and we're go-getters. We want to buy the farm next door, but that will be overshadowed by the Transgrid. I'd also like to refer to a sentiment that was certainly put forward at the Moolameen meetings, and that is that Transgrid have a sentiment that the agricultural land is less valuable than the state forest or the national park, and that this is not something we agree with. The environmental impact is exactly the same, where we have, as you heard today, Australasian bitterns, southern bell frogs, we've got the bushstone curlew project, we're high value agriculture. Our region delivered almost 8.5% of the Riverina rice crop this year. That's amazing. We have some of the best rice growers, and we have a publication on Murray Land and Water Management Wildlife Survey for everybody to have a look at. So there are lots of environmental bonuses in our region that are being put below that of the national park. And I just feel that there should be an equalising, or at least compare apples with apples. We're not able to farm the national park. Possibly a good thing because there's ferals and Bathurst burrs and all those things. But we would like to say that we are just as important. Well, we're more important than the national park. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So just a reminder, if you could state your name at the start. I think, yeah, we've got your name from before, but thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for reminding me.
And I've spoken previously, but Neil Bull from the Rice Growers Association. Alison covered off on something I wanted to emphasise, which was the environmental side and that fly path stuff. If you don't know that, I was the instigator of the Bitters in Rice project, and which has also led to the massive work across the country on the recovery of that threatened species. I'll highlight that the one bird we have and use for display purposes that we had taxidermed was, guess what, killed flying into a power line. And it was a major power line too. We're lucky enough to pick it up to be able to preserve that bird for education purposes. But these overhead lines have massive risks with the flight paths that shouldn't be ignored. I have serious concerns with the Victorian side of this line as well, travelling through some pretty amazing wetlands. But V&I West Line and this proposed route is going through an area of floodplains, natural ephemeral wetlands, and also many wetlands that now receive adaptive environment water as well. So that, you know, that's a consideration that's really not been picked up in terms of the environmental impacts of such an overhead pole line through the current proposed route. I just wanted to emphasise that. The other point that linked with Alison's comment, in Victoria, potato farms is rated as a high-valued agriculture enterprise or high-valued land. In this case, a rice farm is not, and I do not understand that.
Sally Dye again. I've spoken previously. I just wanted to highlight the advantages of undergrounding these things against going over the top. It's a matter of reduced fire risk, reduced compensation payments needing to be paid, nullifies the impact of the visual amenity, so there's less depreciation, reduced or no devaluation of the surrounding assets, so the properties next door that these ones don't actually run through, reduced impact on landholder equity with the banks because there's less devaluation. There's greatly reduced change of land use compensation required. There's reduced impact on the environment, both flora and fauna. Reduced easement acquisition costs as the easements are narrower and it would follow a more direct route and potentially along public lands instead of over private lands. Reduced construction costs by a shorter, directer route. And in this case, it would, if they did the original direct route through Moama Central, undergrounding, it would be 156 kilometres less than following their current preferred proposal, or approximately that. Various numbers have come from Transgrid. Reduced fire insurance costs on an annual basis to the landholders and or to Transgrid if we can get it written into the easement agreements. No impact on agricultural aviation, so people will be able to maintain their current use of planes, gyros, drones, etc., and stay as world leaders. No exposure to extreme weather events, and that's really important because the reduced risk of system failure. On the 28th of September 2016, when South Australia went to a statewide electrical blackout because the 23 powers collapsed in a wind event, these are the same sort of towers, I believe, and if we're getting more extreme events going to happen with climate change, putting in overhead wires and poles is actually leaving the system open to further collapse with more frequently with more extreme events. No arcing causing fires in dust storms or bushfire smoke causing arcing, further arcing and fires. It means people will still be able to burn their stubbles if they wanted to or whatever, whereas once the wires go in, that'll be another management practice that won't be allowed. More importantly, it increased the mental health from maintaining our beautiful natural landscapes. It will give Transgrid, if they went underground, a social licence to operate, or certainly improve their social licence. And finally, it would have a reduced negative flow through to the community from reduced primary production. I just thought it was important to highlight that there are so many positives in undergrounding against overhead wires. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anne Hare. I just wanted to speak about the raptor birds that fly along and look down because they're hunters and they go into these things. So, for instance, if you have a pair of wedge-tailed eagles come into the area, they're cleaned up by the power lines. Nothing to say that another pair, they come into the area because there's no opposition to them, and again, and again, and again, with kilometres and kilometres and kilometres of it. And all the raptor birds around here are fair game for these big power lines. Also, I want to speak on the mental health. Well, since the 7th of July, it has been extraordinary. We have had to be up, well, I don't know that many people have slept since we got this dumped on us. The amount of information that you've had to go through, the amount of submissions that you've had to read, the education of yourself for wind and solar. I refuse to call them farms. They do not generate a crop or livestock. They are installations. They actually call themselves solar electricity generation works, not farms. So they don't produce farms. So we all need to stop making them light and fluffy and calling them farms, because they are not. They intermittently produce things. While I'm on wind generation from turbines, I don't know if anybody knows about the leading edge degradation.
that happens in the 3rd and 4th year of a wind turbine on every wing of it, and then it spews blue asbestos dust from then on for its next, 16 years of life, times how many are on a plot? 20, 200? All over the ground, over the people, over the environment, over the animals, over the flora, over the fauna, over the people. Then the rain comes along and washes it. Google it. Blue asbestos dust is the worst asbestos. I can't believe that we're actually bringing that into the country. We are letting it go into our land when we have nuclear. It could go on the same place, the coal, same footprint, use the same lines. Maybe we should spend the $1.5 trillion on working out what we could do with nuclear waste, instead of imposing people like us that are just trying to live their lives, do their best, pay their taxes, look after their communities, keep their mental health, and not have to walk out every morning and look at 3 or 4 or a dozen dirty big transmission lines. Thank you.
Chair, I just wanted to
We can't ask questions.
No,
There's
it's not
another
about.
man that wants to make a submission as well, as indicated.
It's not a question. It's more just in relation to asbestos and. I just want to make
Definitely it's a question. Like,
do you want to come forward? You can't, mate.
We
It's a public
can't do
forum.
it in a public forum. We all want to, but you know the rules. We
Yeah,
can't.
right.
We've got to hear from someone else.
Yeah.
I just think it's important to say that, we can't import asbestos.
Order.
And that, yeah. I don't want to.
Yeah. Thank you. If you could come forward. Had you finished making your remarks?
Yes, I think so, but putting these lines through is an intergenerational incumbent on future generations, as is spewing asbestos dust over every acre of our land.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just with the time we have left, sorry, I
Yeah,
wasn't sure
I'll be
we would
quick.
get there, but yeah.
Robert
Go for
Bolton again. I just want to make a disclosure up front. I'm a member of something called Dispute Advisory Board. That's a group of ex-engineers and lawyers that get resolved in dealing with commercial disputes, particularly in infrastructure. The reason I'm bringing it to this group's attention, in New South Wales, it is the leader of using that, particularly within transport for New South Wales, so roads, rail projects, that type of thing. And the mechanism is you have a client, which is typically transport, and a contractor, and then there's a third entity who the Dispute Advisory Board, who resolve major commercial conflicts so they don't, the projects go better and moving on. That technique has been founded in New South Wales, and it's actually world leading. The reason I mention it to this group, because we are moving to a situation where there's going to be need to be rapid conflict resolution. You actually have it in New South Wales. It's not bad in Queensland. The Queensland government follow, and Western Australia. The point to note in Victoria, the Victorian Treasury is anti this approach, and I think this committee would pay a lot of time to talk to your Transport for New South Wales colleagues and understand how that mechanism works and how it could be applied to help these people behind me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. That concludes our public forum for today, and indeed our hearing. I'd like to again sincerely thank everyone that came along today to speak to the committee, and those that have listened from the gallery as well. It's important that we hear from people like yourselves about the impact that the transmission infrastructure related to renewable energy projects will have. It will help to shape our report and formulate what we hope are important recommendations for the government. So again, thank you. And that ends our hearing for today.